The two children I cherished kicked me out of the very mansion I built with my own blood and sweat. Leave and never return to this mansion of ours, they told me, throwing my clothes onto the wet pavement in a black plastic trash bag. The ones I called my family betrayed me without a single ounce of hesitation. I did not argue. I did not scream. I did not beg for their mercy. I just picked up that trash bag, smiled to myself, and walked away in the freezing rain. 5 minutes later, I made one phone call, and soon they would be on their knees begging for a forgiveness they would never get. My name is Nathaniel, but people call me Nate. I am 71 years old, and before I tell you how I systematically dismantled my ungrateful children's lives, let me know where you are watching this from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that greed and disrespect always come with a heavy, heavy price. It was a gloomy Tuesday afternoon in the affluent suburbs of Chicago. I was out in the front yard, quietly tending to the rose bushes my late wife Beatrice had planted 5 years ago. I wore my usual faded gray cardigan, a worn-out pair of denim jeans, and my old gardening gloves. To the outside world, and especially to my daughter-in-law, Chloe, I was just a tired, broke old man living past his expiration date. I liked it that way. I liked keeping my true self hidden. But my silence was mistaken for weakness. The peaceful quiet of the afternoon was shattered by a loud, heavy thud. A black garbage bag landed right on top of Beatrice's prized red roses, splitting open to reveal my old flannel shirts, my shaving kit, and my worn-out loafers. I slowly straightened my aching back, wiped the soil from my hands, and looked up. Chloe stood on the top of the marble steps of my porch. She was 35 years old, a white woman dripping in designer clothes paid for by my son's credit cards. She looked down at me with absolute disgust, smoothing the wrinkles from her overpriced silk dress. Behind her stood my son Julian, a 42-year-old man playing the role of a hotshot corporate executive, though he refused to meet my eyes. Next to him was my daughter Maya, 38 years old, busy checking her manicured nails as if kicking her own father out of his home was just another tedious chore on her schedule. "You are done here," Chloe sneered, her voice echoing across the manicured lawn. She spoke to me with that casual cruelty she usually reserved for the waitstaff at restaurants. "This mansion is ours now. Leave and never return. Go back to the South Chicago slums where you belong. That is your real place anyway, you old parasite. Go back to your kind." I looked at the trash bag, then up at my son. "Julian," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and steady. "What is the meaning of this? Are you letting your wife throw my belongings into the dirt?" Julian finally stepped forward, swallowing hard. He pulled a crisp sheet of legal paper from the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He cleared his throat, trying desperately to project authority. "I am sorry, Dad, but it is just business. Do you remember that transfer of deed authorization you signed last year? The one you signed when I told you I needed the house as collateral to secure a business loan for my firm. I remembered it perfectly. I had signed a dummy document to test him to see how far his desperation would take him." "Well," Julian continued, avoiding my gaze, "Maya and I decided to execute it. We just sold the estate. The deal closed this morning. An investment group called Apex Capital bought it in cash for $5 million. The money is being wired to my account. You have no legal right to be on this property anymore. The new owners want the place vacated immediately." Maya finally looked up from her phone, a nasty smirk playing on her lips. "Do not make this harder than it has to be, old man," she said, crossing her arms. "We need the money to maintain our lifestyle. You are 71 years old. You do not need a 10-bedroom estate. Take your trash bag and go find a cheap retirement home in the city. We are done taking care of you." Taking care of me, I almost laughed out loud. For the past 5 years since Beatrice passed away, they had not cooked me a single meal. They had not paid a single utility bill for this massive estate. They treated me like a ghost haunting their glamorous lives, an embarrassing reminder of the humble working-class roots they were so desperate to erase. They thought I was just a retired mechanic who got lucky and bought a nice house decades ago. They thought I was surviving on a meager pension. I looked at the three of them standing on my porch. Julian drowning in a fake sense of power, unaware of the massive storm heading his way. Maya completely consumed by her superficial greed. And Chloe, a woman whose arrogance was only matched by her ignorance. I did not yell. I did not curse them out. I did not shed a single tear. I simply took off my dirty gardening gloves, bent down, and picked up the torn garbage bag. "Goodbye, Julian," I said softly. "You have made your choice." The sky opened up and a cold, heavy rain began to fall as I walked down the long, winding driveway. I did not walk fast. I took my time, letting the rain soak through my old cardigan. Behind me, I could hear the heavy mahogany front door slam shut, followed by the faint sound of Chloe laughing. They were celebrating. They thought they had just won the lottery. They thought they had successfully discarded their useless old father and walked away with $5 million. I walked for 2 blocks, staying close to the tree line until the mansion was out of sight. I did not walk toward a bus stop. I turned the corner onto a quiet, secluded street where a sleek, bulletproof black limousine was waiting silently by the curb. The chauffeur, a towering man in a sharp black suit, immediately stepped out with an umbrella. He quickly opened the heavy door for me and handed me a warm, dry towel. I slid into the plush leather seat, tossing the wet garbage bag onto the floorboard. The interior of the car was warm and quiet, a sanctuary of absolute power. I dried my face, picked up the encrypted phone from the center console, and dialed my lawyer and oldest friend, Desmond Vance. Desmond and I had grown up together on the rough streets of South Chicago. We had built our empires from the ground up, fighting tooth and nail for every single dollar. Desmond answered on the first ring. "Nate, what is the situation? Did they take the bait?" I leaned back into the leather seat, a cold, hard smile forming on my face. "Desmond, the kids just kicked me out into the rain. Chloe threw my clothes out in a garbage bag and told me to go back to the slums. They used the dummy authorization document. Julian stood right there and told me they sold the house for $5 million to a firm called Apex Capital." I heard Desmond chuckle deeply on the other end of the line, a rich, booming sound. "Apex Capital. Do these arrogant fools really not know that you are the founder and sole chairman of Apex Capital? They just sold your own house back to you, and they think they outsmarted you. They think I am just an ignorant old man who does not know how the world works," I said, pouring myself a glass of aged bourbon from the car's minibar. "They are celebrating right now, thinking they are about to get a $5 million wire transfer. But Julian is acting too fast. He is acting like a man with a gun to his head. You do not illegally sell your father's house unless you are in deep, deep trouble." "You are right," Desmond said, his tone turning serious and professional. "My financial investigators have been looking into Julian's firm all morning. I will have the full report for you soon, but it is not looking good, Nate." "Desmond," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "dig deeper. Find out exactly who Julian owes money to. Find out what he is hiding from the federal auditors. He is desperate, and I am about to buy every single ounce of his debt. By tomorrow morning, I want to own his entire life." I sat in the dimly lit office of Sterling Holdings, watching the city lights of Chicago blur against the rain-streaked glass. Desmond walked in, his face grave. He dropped a thick manila folder onto my massive mahogany desk. The sound echoed like a judge slamming a gavel. "Nate," Desmond said, his voice stripped of any usual warmth, "your son is not just drowning in debt. He is a criminal. He is looking at 20 years in federal prison." I opened the folder. The number stared back at me, sharp and unforgiving. Julian had not merely taken out a bad loan to fund his ridiculous lifestyle. He had embezzled $3 million from the pension funds of his own clients. He stole from hardworking people. Teachers, nurses, mechanics, people just like I used to be before I built this empire with my bare hands. Desmond leaned over the desk, pointing at a red flag document. "A federal audit is scheduled for Friday." Julian panicked. He needed a massive injection of cash to quietly replace the missing $3 million before the Fed started digging through his corporate accounts. "That is why he illegally sold your mansion to Apex Capital. He is trying to save his own skin at the expense of yours. He thinks the $5 million wire transfer from the sale will cover the stolen money and leave him with a comfortable profit." I closed the folder. The betrayal was no longer just a family matter. It was a felony. My son was a thief, a coward who preyed on the vulnerable and then threw his own elderly father onto the street into the freezing rain to cover his tracks. "Let him think he has won," I told Desmond. "Let him celebrate tonight, because tomorrow I am going to tighten the noose until he begs for air." I knew exactly how Julian operated. When he thought he had escaped a disaster, he threw money around to project an image of untouchable success. Sure enough, My security team intercepted a digital invitation. Julian was hosting a lavish cocktail party that very evening at a private rooftop lounge downtown, celebrating a supposed massive influx of foreign investment. He was spending the money he thought he was getting from my house before the wire transfer even cleared. I could have walked through the front doors of that lounge in my tailored Italian suits and shut the party down immediately. But a predator does not announce his arrival. I needed to see him in his element. I needed to hear the exact lies he was spinning. I instructed my security team to secure a uniform from the catering company servicing the event. An hour later, I walked through the service elevator of the luxury high-rise wearing a faded delivery jacket, a worn-out cap pulled low over my eyes, and carrying a heavy crate of expensive champagne. No one looks twice at an old, invisible black delivery man. To the wealthy elite, the working class are just ghosts holding trays. I navigated the bustling kitchen and stepped into the shadows near the extravagant marble bar. The room was packed with corporate sharks, socialites, and oblivious investors. The music was loud, the laughter was hollow, and the smell of expensive perfume masked the stench of their greed. I spotted Julian immediately. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, holding a glass of aged scotch surrounded by a group of wealthy partners. Chloe was clinging to his arm, wearing a diamond necklace that I knew she had not paid for. I moved closer, busying myself with stacking champagne bottles on a side table, my ears sharp. So Julian, one of the older partners, asked, taking a sip of his drink, "How did you manage to secure such a massive capital injection so quickly? I heard rumors your firm was facing some serious liquidity issues last quarter." Julian laughed, an arrogant, dismissive sound that made my blood run cold. "Liquidity issues, please. Just a temporary cash flow restructure. I actually just liquidated a major family asset, a massive estate in the suburbs. The old man finally decided to move on, so we cashed it out." Another partner chimed in looking surprised. "Your father, I thought he was still living there. How is the old guy doing?" Chloe rolled her eyes and let out a dramatic, exaggerated sigh. "Oh, you know how it is with the elderly. He was becoming completely unmanageable, starting to lose his mind, forgetting things, walking around in those filthy mechanic clothes of his. It was embarrassing, really. It is hard to maintain a certain image when your father-in-law looks like he belongs in a soup kitchen." Julian nodded smoothly, swirling his scotch. "Exactly. We had to make the tough call as a family. We shipped the old man off to a run-down nursing home facility on the outskirts of the city. It is for his own good. He is comfortable, and frankly, we needed the space in the capital to expand our operations. He does not need a mansion. He barely knows what day it is anyway." I gripped the neck of a champagne bottle so hard my knuckles turned white. Shipped off to a run-down nursing home. That was the story they were feeding their high society friends. They were erasing me from society, painting me as a senile burden, a crazy old man, all while planning to use the money from my stolen home to save Julian from federal prison. They were not just greedy, they were absolute sociopaths. I had heard enough. My son was a lost cause, and his wife was a venomous accessory to his delusions. I turned away from the bar, intending to slip back into the service elevator and set Desmond loose on the financial trap we were building. But as I walked down the dimly lit hallway toward the exit, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. The door to one of the private VIP rooms was slightly ajar. Through the narrow crack, I saw my daughter Maya. She was looking around nervously, her overpriced designer handbag slung over her shoulder. Standing across from her was a man I recognized from my early days dealing with the less savory elements of the local art world. He was an underground antique dealer, a man known for fencing stolen goods without asking any questions. Spread out on the polished wooden table between them were 3 vintage paintings. My breath caught in my throat. I felt a sharp physical pain in my chest. They were Beatrice's paintings. My late wife had spent years collecting those specific antique portraits. She cherished them. They were the very soul of our family home, worth tens of thousands of dollars. But to me, their emotional value was priceless. I stepped closer to the door, remaining completely hidden in the shadows. Maya leaned over the table, her voice hushed but absolutely frantic. "Look, I need $50,000 for these 3 right now. They are authentic 18th century. My mother bought them at a private auction in Europe. You can check the signatures yourself. Just give me the money." The dealer inspected the canvas with a magnifying glass, shaking his head slowly. "They are good, Maya. But 50 is too steep for an unrecorded under-the-table transaction. I can give you $30,000 in cash right now. Take it or leave it. Maya slammed her hand on the table in frustration. 30. That will barely cover the minimum payments on my credit cards. My husband is threatening to freeze my bank accounts, and if I do not pay off this mountain of debt by Monday, he is going to file for divorce and kick me out. I need at least 40. The dealer chuckled dryly, packing up his magnifying glass. Your marital problems are not my concern, sweetheart. 30,000. Cash. And I walk out the back door right now. Maya hesitated, her face twisted in pure desperation. She looked at the paintings, the very paintings her mother had gently dusted every Sunday morning. The paintings Beatrice had explicitly said were meant to be kept in the family for generations, a legacy of our success. Fine. Maya spat out, her voice dripping with selfish venom. Just give me the cash. I hate looking at these old things anyway. They smell like my parents' miserable past. I stood in the dark hallway, my heart turning into a block of solid ice. My son was a federal criminal who sold my house to cover his embezzlement. My daughter was a common thief selling her dead mother's sacred memories to an underground fence just to pay for her superficial debt-ridden lifestyle. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they had successfully discarded the old man. I slowly backed away from the door and walked into the service elevator. I pulled out my encrypted phone and dialed Desmond. Desmond, I said, my voice as cold and unforgiving as a Chicago winter storm. Yes, Nate, he answered immediately. Change of plans, I told him. Do not freeze Julian's accounts just yet. Let the real estate transaction go through. Let him think he has the $5 million. Let him transfer the money to cover his stolen funds. Understood, Desmond said. What else? Locate an antique dealer trying to fence 3 18th century portraits tomorrow morning. Buy them back at any cost. But make sure the dealer signs a sworn affidavit stating exactly who sold them to him. They wanted to play games with my money, my home, and my dead wife's memory. I was going to let them dig their graves so deep that they would never ever see the light of day again. The morning air was biting cold when my armored limousine pulled up to a discreet, dimly lit storefront in the historic district. The faded gold lettering on the window read Rare Antiquities, but Desmond and I knew exactly what kind of business operated behind those frosted glass panes. It was a high-end clearinghouse for desperate people selling stolen family heirlooms, no questions asked. I stepped out of the car wearing the same faded cardigan and worn-out loafers from the day before. I pushed the heavy oak door open, the little brass bell chiming above my head. The shop smelled of old paper, polished wood, and greed. The dealer, a slick man in his late 40s with a tailored vest, looked up from his ledger. He scanned my old clothes, my wrinkled face, and my weathered hands. His expression instantly shifted to a mask of condescending impatience. He thought I was just an old lost man looking for a cheap trinket. We are closed to walk-ins, the dealer said, waving a hand dismissively. Appointment only. I suggest you try the thrift store 2 blocks down. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I simply walked past his counter and headed straight toward the back wall. And there they were. 3 exquisite 18th century portraits resting against a velvet chair, waiting to be shipped off to some anonymous private collector. My late wife Beatrice had spent 10 years hunting down those specific paintings. They were the soul of our home, and my own daughter had sold them for absolute pennies just to keep her fake, glamorous life afloat. Those are not for sale, the dealer barked, stepping out from behind his counter, his face turning red with anger. I told you to leave before I call security. I turned to face him. I reached into my coat and pulled out a thick, heavy leather briefcase. I set it gently on top of an antique glass display case and popped the golden latches. The lid sprang open. The dealer stopped dead in his tracks. His mouth fell open. Inside the briefcase were neat, tightly bound stacks of crisp $100 bills. Exactly $100,000 in untraceable cash. I will be taking my wife's paintings back now, I said, my voice as calm and heavy as a falling safe. The dealer's eyes darted from the cash to my face, suddenly realizing that the old man in the ragged cardigan was not who he appeared to be. Look, he stammered, his arrogance completely evaporating. I bought those legitimately. A woman came in last night. A woman named Maya Sterling, I interrupted, stepping closer to him, letting the full weight of my presence fill the room. You bought stolen property from a desperate, debt-ridden woman, property that belongs to the Nathaniel Sterling estate. You know who I am now, do you not? The blood drained from the dealer's face. Everyone in the high-end financial and art districts of Chicago knew the name Sterling. They just had never seen the face behind the empire because I chose to remain invisible. Take the 100,000, I commanded, my tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. That is 3 times what you paid her. But you are not just selling them back to me. You are going to earn your profit. I reached into my inner pocket and pulled out a crisp single sheet of paper. It was a legally binding affidavit drafted by Desmond early that morning. You are going to sign this document, I told him, sliding a solid gold fountain pen across the glass counter. It is a sworn statement confirming that Maya Sterling came into your shop, claimed ownership of these paintings, and sold you stolen goods for $30,000 in cash. The dealer looked terrified. If I sign this, I am admitting to fencing stolen art. It will ruin my reputation. If you do not sign it, I said, leaning in so close he could smell the mint on my breath. My lawyers will contact the federal authorities before you can even lock your front door. They will dismantle your entire operation, seize every asset in this shop, and you will spend the next decade in federal prison. Sign the paper, take the money, and forget we ever had this conversation. His hand trembled violently as he picked up the pen. He signed his name on the dotted line. I closed the briefcase, left it on the counter, and walked out the door while my security team carefully carried my wife's precious memories back to the limousine. I had just purchased the perfect weapon to destroy my own daughter. Later that afternoon, I was sitting in the private study of my downtown penthouse, gently wiping the dust off the golden frame of Beatrice's favorite painting. My encrypted cell phone began to vibrate on the mahogany desk. I glanced at the screen. It was Maya. I let it ring 4 times before I finally pressed accept. Dad, Maya's voice came through the speaker, high-pitched, frantic, and dripping with perfectly manufactured tears. Dad, it is a disaster. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the very paintings she claimed were lost. What is wrong, Maya? I asked, making my voice sound weak like the frail old man she believed me to be. The mansion was broken into last night, Maya wailed, sobbing hysterically into the receiver. I came over to check on the house before the new buyers moved in, and the back door was smashed open. They ransacked the place, Dad. They took Mom's paintings, the 18th century portraits. They are gone. The sheer audacity of her performance was almost impressive. She was crying over the desecration of her mother's memory, a desecration she had committed with her own 2 hands just 12 hours ago. That is terrible, I said slowly. Have you called the police? No. The police are completely useless, Dad. She stammered quickly, desperate to control the narrative. They will just file a report and forget about it. These are professional art thieves. If we do not act fast, Mom's paintings will be sold on the black market and we will never see them again. And what do you propose we do, Maya? I asked, swirling a glass of sparkling water on my desk. I know a guy, a specialized private investigator who deals in stolen art. She lied smoothly, her fake sobs turning into a calculated plea. But he requires a retainer. $50,000 up front. Dad, I know Julian and I were harsh yesterday, but this is Mom's legacy. You have that old retirement savings account, right? The one you were saving for emergencies. Please, Dad, you have to wire me $50,000 right now so I can hire him. I promise I will pay you back. She did not want a private investigator. She wanted $50,000 to pay off the remaining balance of her crushing credit card debt before her husband filed for divorce. She had sold her mother's soul for $30,000, and now she was trying to squeeze another $50,000 out of the father she had just kicked out into the rain. I looked at the beautiful oil painting of the woman I had loved for 40 years. I thought about the garbage bag sitting in the mud. Maya, I said, my voice dropping its frail disguise, becoming cold, flat, and absolute. You and your brother threw me out of my own home yesterday. You handed me a trash bag and told me to go back to the slums. I do not have $50,000 for you. And even if I did, I would rather burn it than give you a single dime. Dad, please, you cannot do this to Mom's memory. She shrieked, the panic in her voice turning genuine as she realized her plan was failing. I am doing exactly what needs to be done, I replied quietly. Goodbye, Maya. I hung up the phone and blocked her number. She was backed into a corner, completely suffocated by her own debt and lies. And I knew exactly what desperate animals did when they were cornered. They bite. I did not have to wait long. 2 hours later, a secure notification popped up on my computer screen. Desmond called me almost immediately. Nate Desmond said, his voice laced with absolute disgust. Your daughter just went straight to Chloe. The 2 of them are teaming up. What did they do? I asked, watching the financial alerts flash red across my monitor. Chloe had access to your mail and personal files when you lived at the mansion, Desmond explained. She kept a record of your social security number, your old bank routing details, and your personal identification. They are furious that you refused to give Maya the cash, so they decided to take it by force. I watched the screen as 3 new credit card accounts were successfully opened under the name Nathaniel Sterling. They just applied for 3 unsecured credit cards in your name, Desmond continued. And because of your pristine and visible credit history, they were instantly approved for the maximum limits. They think you are a poor old man, Nate. They think they are draining whatever tiny pension you have left to pay off Maya's debts and fund Chloe's shopping habits. They are maxing them out right now, I murmured, watching transactions from luxury boutiques and debt collection agencies flood the newly opened accounts. They just committed federal identity theft and wire fraud, Desmond said, a dangerous edge to his voice. Should I call our contacts at the FBI and shut this down? I smiled a slow, predatory grin in the quiet of my penthouse. No, Desmond, do not interfere. Let them spend it. Let them rack up the charges. Let them feel like absolute geniuses. But Nate. Desmond warned. Desmond, I interrupted smoothly. They think they are stealing a few $1,000s from a helpless old fool. They do not realize they just stole the identity of a billionaire. When the federal authorities get involved, it will not just be a family dispute. It will be a federal mandate. Document every single transaction. Let them tie their own nooses. Tomorrow, Julian has a meeting to sign the final liquidation papers for the mansion, and I am going to attend it personally. The screen of my encrypted phone lit up the dark mahogany desk of my penthouse. It was a single silent notification from the bank, but it felt like a gunshot in the quiet room. I picked up the device and stared at the glowing numbers. $150,000. The charge had just been processed at one of the most exclusive diamond boutiques on the Magnificent Mile. I let out a slow, heavy breath. I had expected Maya to use the stolen identity to pay off her suffocating credit card debts. But this transaction did not belong to my daughter. The digital footprint traced straight back to a device registered to Chloe, my daughter-in-law. The same woman who had thrown my clothes into the dirt, the same woman who had told me to go back to the slums was now using my name to buy herself diamond jewelry. She thought she had found the ultimate loophole. She believed she was draining the life savings of a helpless, senile old man who would be too confused to ever notice. She had no idea that the credit card she had fraudulently opened was linked to a ghost account I had intentionally left vulnerable. She was not stealing my money. She was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs leading directly to her own destruction. I picked up the phone and called Desmond. She took the bait. I said, my voice steady, stripped of any fatherly warmth. $150,000 in a single swipe. I see it on my end too, Desmond replied, his tone all business. She is getting greedy, Nate. That kind of money triggers automatic fraud alerts. We could shut this down right now. I can call the local precinct and have a squad car at the boutique before she even walks out with the diamonds. No, I told him, standing up and looking out over the glittering skyline of Chicago. Do not call the local police. If we arrest her now, a high-priced lawyer will claim it was a misunderstanding. She will cry, play the victim, and get away with probation. We are not going to the local precinct, Desmond. Bring the car around. We are going to the federal building. 30 minutes later, my armored limousine pulled up to the towering glass and steel structure of the FBI field office in downtown Chicago. The cold wind whipped at my coat as Desmond and I walked through the heavy revolving doors. We bypassed the standard reception lines and took a private elevator up to the cybercrimes division. We were there to see Special Agent Marcus Vance. He was not related to Desmond, but he was a man who owed me a life debt. Decades ago, before he was a decorated federal agent, Marcus was a bright kid from the South Side who got caught up in a bad situation with a corrupt loan shark. I had used my resources to clear his debt and fund his law degree, asking for nothing in return except that he use his position to protect the innocent. Today, I was here to collect on that favor. Agent Vance was waiting for us in a soundproof briefing room. He was a tall, sharp-looking African-American man in his late 40s. He shook my hand with deep respect, but when Desmond laid the thick file of financial documents on the metal table, Vance's professional demeanor hardened. What am I looking at? Nate Vance asked, opening the folder. You are looking at a coordinated case of identity theft, wire fraud, and grand larceny, I explained calmly. The perpetrator is my daughter-in-law, Chloe Sterling. She used my social security number to open 3 unsecured lines of credit. An hour ago, she purchased $150,000 worth of diamonds. Vance studied the documents, his eyes narrowing as he tracked the IP addresses and forged digital signatures. This is incredibly sloppy work, he noted. She left a digital footprint the size of a crater. I can have a federal warrant signed by a judge in an hour. We can raid her home tonight." I raised my hand, stopping him. "No raids. Not yet." Vance looked at me confused. "Nate, she just committed a federal felony. Why wait?" "Because I want her to feel untouchable," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the sterile room. "I want her to think she got away with it. If you arrest her now for $150,000, she might find a way to manipulate a jury. I want you to create a freeze evidence file, monitor the accounts live, let the transactions process. I want you to wait until the total amount crosses the threshold for a Tier 1 federal offense. I want the mandatory minimum sentence to be so high that no lawyer in this country can save her." Vance leaned back in his chair, understanding the magnitude of what I was asking. "You are letting her hang herself," he murmured. "She threw me out of my own house in a garbage bag," I replied, staring directly into the agent's eyes. "She and my son sold my home to cover up his embezzlement. They are planning to forge medical documents to have me committed to a psychiatric ward. This is not just about stolen credit cards, Marcus. They are trying to erase my existence. I am not just going to stop them. I am going to bury them under the weight of their own greed." Vance slowly nodded. He closed the folder and typed a command into his secure terminal. "Done. The accounts are flagged under a covert federal operation. Every time she swipes that card, it automatically logs directly into the FBI database. We will let her build her own prison cell." I thanked him and walked out of the briefing room with Desmond. The heavy doors sealed shut behind us, locking Chloe's fate in stone. She was currently walking around the city dripping in stolen diamonds, completely unaware that the federal government was now recording her every breath. As we stepped into the elevator to leave the building, Desmond's phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket and read the message. A grim smile spread across his face. "The timing could not be more perfect," Desmond said, holding the screen up for me to see. "It is an urgent email from Julian's law firm. He is pushing aggressively for the final closing on the mansion." "What is the rush?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The federal audit on his company is looming," Desmond explained. "He needs that $5 million wire transfer from Apex Capital to clear into his corporate account immediately so he can cover up the $3 million he embezzled. But there is a catch. Because of the size of the transaction and the sudden transfer of the deed, the title company is requiring a physical signature from an authorized representative of Apex Capital." I watched the floor numbers count down on the elevator display. Julian was sweating. He was a desperate rat trapped in a corner waiting for a savior he did not know was actually his executioner. He scheduled a meeting for tomorrow morning at his lawyer's office. Desmond continued. "He is expecting an executive from Apex Capital to show up, sign the liquidation papers, and release the funds." "Who do you want me to send, Nate?" "One of our senior partners." The elevator doors slid open to the lobby. I stepped out, adjusting the collar of my coat. I thought about the way Julian had looked at me when he handed me that fake transfer document. I thought about the contempt in his voice when he told me it was just business. "Do not send any of the partners," I told Desmond, my voice carrying a quiet, dangerous thrill. "Send me." Desmond stopped walking, looking at me with wide eyes. "Nate, if you walk into that room, they will instantly know you are the chairman of Apex Capital. The game will be over." "No," I said softly, a dark smile forming on my lips. "They will not know anything. Julian and Chloe are completely blinded by their own prejudice and arrogance. They think I am an uneducated, broken old man. When I walk into that luxury law firm tomorrow, I am not going to introduce myself as the chairman. We are going to give them exactly what they expect to see, but we are going to hide a poison pill in that contract that they will swallow whole." I walked out into the chilling Chicago wind, the storm clouds gathering above the city. Tomorrow, Julian would finally get his $5 million check, but he had absolutely no idea that he was about to sign away his freedom, his career, and his entire life right into the hands of the father he had thrown away. "Let them sleep well tonight," I whispered to the wind, "because tomorrow, the real nightmare begins. The 2 children I cherished kicked me out of the very mansion I built with my own blood and sweat. Leave and never return to this mansion of ours," they told me, throwing my clothes onto the wet pavement in a black plastic trash bag. The ones I called my family betrayed me without a single ounce of hesitation. I did not argue. I did not scream. I did not beg for their mercy. I just picked up that trash bag, smiled to myself, and walked away in the freezing rain. 5 minutes later, I made one phone call, and soon they would be on their knees begging for a forgiveness they would never get. I stripped off the faded gray cardigan, the worn-out denim, and the scuffed loafers. Those were the clothes of the man my son thought I was, the man he thought he could safely discard. Today, I dressed for war. I opened the cedar doors of my private walk-in closet and pulled out a custom-tailored charcoal Armani suit, a crisp Egyptian cotton shirt, and a pair of polished black Oxford shoes. As I buttoned the suit jacket, I looked at my reflection. The tired, broken old man from the slums of South Chicago was completely gone. In his place stood the man who had built a billion-dollar empire from the ground up. I adjusted my silk tie, feeling the heavy, cold weight of absolute power settle over my shoulders. My armored limousine dropped me off in front of a towering glass and steel skyscraper in the heart of downtown Chicago. This was the home of the city's most elite corporate law firm. I walked through the revolving doors and took the private elevator straight to the 60th floor. The door slid open to reveal a sprawling reception area with imported marble floors and panoramic views of the city skyline. I did not stop at the front desk. I knew exactly where I was going. I approached the main glass conference room at the end of the hall. Through the transparent walls, I could see them. Julian and Chloe were sitting at a massive oak table waiting. Chloe was wearing a tight designer dress, her legs crossed arrogantly. Around her neck glittered the exact diamond necklace she had fraudulently purchased yesterday using my stolen identity. She was literally wearing the evidence of her federal crime, completely oblivious to the noose tightening around her neck. Beside her, my son Julian was aggressively tapping a gold pen against the polished wood. His leg was bouncing nervously under the table. He was sweating, his face pale despite his expensive suit. The federal audit on his corrupt firm was breathing down his neck. He needed this $5 million wire transfer from Apex Capital to clear today, or he would be spending the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary. He thought he was minutes away from salvation. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped into the room. Chloe looked up first. Her haughty, impatient expression instantly morphed into utter shock, followed rapidly by pure disgust. Julian dropped his gold pen. It clattered loudly against the oak table. They stared at my immaculate Italian suit, then at my face, completely failing to process the reality standing in front of them. "Dad," Julian stammered, standing up so fast his heavy leather chair scraped violently against the floor. "What in the world are you doing here? How did you even get past the lobby security?" Chloe scoffed loudly, clutching the stolen diamonds at her throat. "Julian, I told you that cheap nursing home had terrible security. Look at him. He is completely lost. He probably thinks he is at a church service." She stood up, pointing a manicured finger at me with absolute contempt. "You need to leave right now, old man. We are waiting for the representatives of a multi-billion-dollar investment firm. We are about to close a $5 million deal. We cannot have you wandering around here in your delusions embarrassing us." She reached for the intercom console in the center of the table. "I am calling the building guards to have him physically escorted out." Before her finger could press the security button, the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the conference room swung wide open. In walked Richard Sterling, the senior managing partner of this prestigious law firm. He was a ruthless, high-powered corporate lawyer who charged his clients over $1,000 an hour. Richard stopped dead in his tracks the very second he saw me standing there. He completely ignored Julian. He did not even glance at Chloe. Richard walked straight up to me, hurriedly smoothed his expensive tie and bowed deeply, bending a full 90 degrees at the waist. It was a gesture of absolute, undeniable submission and respect. "Good morning, Mr. Chairman," Richard said, his voice trembling slightly with intimidation. "We are profoundly honored to have you visit our offices personally today. We prepared everything exactly as you requested." The silence that crashed down on the conference room was so heavy it could crush bones. Julian stopped breathing. Chloe froze completely, her hand hovering uselessly over the intercom button. They stared at the senior managing partner of the firm, a man they were paying a fortune to, bowing to the father they had thrown into the rain like garbage. "Mr. Chairman," Julian echoed, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. His eyes darted from Richard to me, his brain desperately trying to reject the impossible truth. I looked at Julian's terrified, pale face. I looked at Chloe, watching the gears jam in her prejudiced mind. I could have ended them right there. I could have revealed my true identity, stripped them of their dignity, and watched them shatter on the marble floor. But Desmond and the federal agents needed Julian to willingly sign this specific contract to trigger the heaviest federal financial charges. If I revealed myself now, they would panic and run. So I looked at Chloe's arrogant, racist face, and I knew exactly how to play her. I knew her inherent bias would never allow her to believe that an old black man from the South Side could be the billionaire chairman of Apex Capital. I threw them a bone, a lie they would be desperate to swallow. I let out a warm, humble chuckle and gently patted the senior lawyer on the shoulder. "Richard, please, no need for the formalities," I said smoothly, forcing a subservient tone into my voice. "You know I am just the chairman's personal driver. I just came up here to deliver his briefcase and make sure the room was ready. He will be joining you all via a secure conference call shortly." I shot a microscopic, razor-sharp glare at Richard. The lawyer was brilliant. He caught my silent command, instantly swallowing his confusion and adjusting his posture. "Ah, yes, of course," Richard covered up flawlessly. "My apologies. Please let the chairman know we are ready whenever he is." The wave of relief that washed over my son and daughter-in-law was sickening. The tension drained out of Julian's shoulders, and he let out a long, shaky breath. Chloe actually laughed a loud, condescending cackle that echoed off the glass walls. "Of course," Chloe muttered to Julian, a vicious smirk returning to her face. "He is just a driver. He probably borrowed that fancy suit from his boss closet to feel important." I knew it. For a second there, I thought the lawyer had lost his mind. Julian wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, regaining his fake, arrogant bravado. "Dad, stop playing around and go wait in the parking garage. You almost gave me a heart attack. Get out of here before the real executives arrive. We have serious business to handle." I smiled, nodding my head subserviently. "Yes, sir," I said softly. "Have a productive meeting." I stepped back, standing quietly in the corner of the room near the door, blending into the shadows like the invisible servant they believed me to be. Richard moved to the head of the table, opening his leather briefcase with professional precision. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents and placed them directly in front of Julian. "These are the final liquidation papers for the estate," Richard explained, sliding a heavy gold pen across the oak table. "Apex Capital has already authorized the $5 million wire transfer. It is currently sitting in escrow. The moment you sign this contract, the funds will immediately clear into your corporate account." Julian's eyes lit up with pure, desperate greed. He did not read a single page. He did not ask his own lawyers to review the terms. He was too consumed by the ticking clock of the federal audit, too desperate to cover up the $3 million he had embezzled. What Julian did not know was that Desmond had personally drafted this exact contract. It looked like a standard real estate buyout wrapped in complex corporate jargon. But buried deep on page 42 was a fatal clause. A financial death sentence. Julian grabbed the gold pen and aggressively signed his name on the dotted line. He flipped the page and signed again. Then he handed the pen to Chloe. She eagerly grabbed it, smiling arrogantly at me from across the room as she signed her name right beneath his. They thought they had just secured their salvation. They thought they were walking away with $5 million to fund their glamorous stolen lives. They had absolutely no idea they had just swallowed a poison pill drafted by my lawyers, and that by tomorrow morning their entire world would explode into ash. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," Richard said, taking the signed contract and sliding it safely into his briefcase. "Apex Capital appreciates doing business with you." I stood in the corner watching my son and his wife celebrate their fake victory. I did not say another word. I just turned around and walked out of the glass room, leaving them to their brief, pathetic illusion of safety. The trap had officially snapped shut, and the timer had just started ticking. I stepped out of the skyscraper and back into the cold, biting Chicago wind. Desmond was already waiting in the back of the armored limousine. As I slid into the plush leather seat, I let out a long, slow breath. The performance was over. The trap was set. "Did he sign it?" Desmond asked, handing me a glass of aged bourbon. "He signed every single page," I replied, taking a slow sip. He did not even read the bold print. He was too busy looking at the zeros on the wire transfer authorization. Desmond let out a deep, rumbling laugh. "He really is a fool. Page 42 of that contract is a masterpiece of corporate warfare, Nate." It was indeed. The clause was buried deep within the standard liability waivers, but its power was absolute. It was a financial death warrant disguised as a routine compliance measure. The clause clearly stated that if the seller was found to be involved in any active financial fraud, embezzlement, or federal investigation, Apex Capital retained the unilateral right to freeze all transferred funds immediately. Furthermore, it granted Apex Capital the authority to seize the seller's remaining assets to compensate for any reputational or legal damages incurred by the transaction. Julian thought he was just selling a house. He did not realize he had just given my company the legal right to become his absolute financial warden. "Now we wait for him to make his move," I said, staring out the tinted windows as the city blurred past. "He has the 5 million. Let us see how fast he tries to hide his sins." My cybersecurity team had already mirrored Julian's banking portals. We could see every move he made in real time. For the rest of the afternoon, I sat in my penthouse watching the monitors like a hawk watching a rat scurry across an open field. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, the $5 million from Apex Capital cleared into Julian's personal offshore account. The celebration was instantaneous. My surveillance team reported that Julian and Chloe immediately booked a private VIP table at a high-end steakhouse downtown. They ordered $3,000 bottles of champagne. They toasted to their brilliance. Chloe was literally wearing the diamond necklace she had bought with my stolen identity, laughing loudly, celebrating the fact that they had successfully discarded an old, useless man and walked away rich. They thought they had won. They thought the storm had passed. But Julian knew he was on a ticking clock. The federal audit of his investment firm was scheduled for 8 o'clock the next morning. He had to replace the $3 million he had stolen from his client's pension funds before the federal examiners looked at his corporate ledgers. At 4:15 in the morning, while Chloe was passed out from the expensive champagne, Julian was wide awake, sweating over his laptop in his home office. On the massive screen in my penthouse, I watched his digital footprint log into his personal banking portal. He initiated a massive wire transfer, $3 million. He was moving the funds from his personal account directly into the corporate holding accounts of his firm. He labeled the transaction as an anonymous capital injection. He clicked confirm. The screen showed a green check mark. Transaction processing. Julian must have let out a massive sigh of relief. He probably leaned back in his expensive desk chair, wiping the cold sweat from his face, thinking he had just pulled off the greatest escape of his life. He had sold my house, covered up his federal crimes, and still had $2 million left over to fund Chloe's shallow materialistic lifestyle. I picked up my encrypted phone and called Desmond. It was 5 in the morning, but I knew my lawyer was awake. He made the transfer. I said, my voice cutting through the early morning silence. $3 million moving into his corporate accounts. Desmond hummed in approval. The arrogance of this boy is truly astounding. He is trying to wash stolen money with more stolen money. "Are we executing the freeze?" "Executed," I commanded. "Lock it all down." Within 60 seconds, Desmond's team at Apex Capital triggered the compliance clause from page 42. We officially flagged the $3 million transfer under the suspicion of active money laundering and federal fraud. Because Julian had signed that specific contract, the bank's algorithms instantly complied with Apex Capital's directive. The $3 million did not reach Julian's corporate account. It did not bounce back to his personal account either. It was suspended in a digital void, completely frozen, completely inaccessible. I poured myself a fresh cup of black coffee and watched the sun slowly rise over Lake Michigan. The sky was painting itself in shades of violent red and deep purple. It was Friday morning, the day of the audit, the day of the reckoning. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, Julian arrived at his corporate office. My private investigators were parked outside his building, feeding me live audio and visual updates. Julian walked through the glass doors of his firm looking like a king. He was wearing a sharp navy blue suit, holding a cup of artisan coffee, smiling confidently at his receptionists. He thought he was invincible. He thought the $3 million was sitting safely in his corporate ledger, ready to blind the federal auditors. 10 minutes later, the elevators pinged. 3 federal auditors in conservative gray suits stepped out carrying heavy briefcases. They were strictly business, their faces devoid of any emotion. They were there to tear his company apart piece by piece. Julian greeted them in the lobby with a wide, arrogant smile. "Gentlemen, welcome," he said smoothly, shaking the lead auditor's hand. "We have prepared a private conference room for you. My books are completely open. You will find that our liquidity is perfectly balanced and our pension funds are performing exceptionally well." The lead auditor did not smile back. He just nodded and followed Julian into the conference room. I sat in my penthouse listening to the live audio feed transmitted from a small device my team had planted in Julian's office weeks ago. I could hear the sound of briefcases snapping open. I could hear the clacking of laptop keys. Mr. Sterling, the lead auditor, said, his voice flat and professional. "We will start with the primary pension holding accounts. We have flagged a $3 million discrepancy from the previous quarter. We need to verify the current balance immediately. Of course, Julian replied, his voice dripping with absolute confidence. I am pulling up the live ledger right now. We recently secured a massive private capital injection. You will see that our reserves are more than adequately funded. I heard the sound of Julian typing on his keyboard. I could picture the smug look on his face as he hit the enter key, expecting to show them a perfectly healthy bank balance. Then there was silence. A long, agonizing, suffocating silence. What is this? Julian whispered. His voice was no longer arrogant. It was completely hollow. It was the sound of a man stepping on a landmine and hearing the click. I looked at my own monitor. I saw exactly what Julian was seeing on his screen. A massive, glaring red error message. Account frozen. Funds suspended under compliance investigation. Initiating Party Apex Capital. Mr. Sterling, the lead auditor, asked, his tone suddenly dropping an octave, becoming sharp and dangerous. Why is your primary holding account showing a deficit of $3 million? And why is there an active federal freeze mandate on your incoming transfers? Julian started hyperventilating. I could hear his rapid, panicked breathing through the audio feed. There must be a mistake, he stammered frantically, slamming his fingers against the keyboard. The money is there. I transferred it this morning. I sold an estate. I have the capital. The bank must be experiencing a glitch. The auditor did not care about glitches. He turned his laptop screen toward Julian. This is not a glitch, Mr. Sterling. This is a targeted asset freeze issued by Apex Capital under suspicion of money laundering. They have flagged your accounts for severe financial fraud. No, Julian gasped, his voice cracking into a high-pitched panic. Apex Capital bought my house. They owe me that money. I signed the contract yesterday. The lead auditor stood up. The sound of his chair scraping against the floor echoed like a death knell. Mr. Sterling, you are currently short $3 million of federal pension funds. Your incoming assets have been seized for fraud. By law, I am required to immediately notify the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Julian let out a pathetic, desperate sob. Please wait. Just give me 1 hour. Let me call my lawyers. Let me call Apex Capital. I can fix this. You cannot fix this, the auditor replied coldly. You are done, Mr. Sterling. Do not leave this building. The federal authorities are on their way. I sat back in my chair, taking a slow sip of my coffee as I listened to my son breaking down into absolute hysterics. He was trapped. He had no money, no leverage, and nowhere to run. The mansion he stole from me was gone. The money he thought he had was frozen. And the federal government was literally walking through his front doors. The first domino had fallen perfectly. Now it was time to let the rest of them crash down. Julian was trapped. He locked the heavy glass door of his corporate office and collapsed into his leather chair, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The federal auditors were sitting just down the hallway in the main conference room, methodically tearing through his financial ledgers. They had already discovered the $3 million deficit in the pension funds. They had already seen the glaring red alert from Apex Capital freezing his incoming assets. They had explicitly told him not to leave the building. He was a drowning man, and the water was rapidly rising above his head. His hands shook uncontrollably as he picked up his cell phone and dialed the contact number for the Apex Capital Executive Board. He needed to beg. He needed to negotiate. He needed to explain that this was all a massive misunderstanding. The line rang once, twice, and then a cold, automated voice echoed through the speaker. The number you have reached is not accepting calls from this line. Julian threw the phone across the room, watching it shatter against the immaculate hardwood floor. He was completely cut off. Julian knew the federal agents would be walking through his doors by the end of the day. He needed a high-powered criminal defense attorney immediately, and those lawyers required massive upfront cash retainers. His corporate accounts were seized. His personal accounts were tied to the frozen funds. He had nothing. But then, a dark, desperate thought crept into his panicked mind. He remembered the one asset he had not yet completely drained: my retirement funds. I was waiting for them. I was sitting on a stained, sagging mattress in a $20 a night motel room deep in the gritty neighborhoods of the South Side. I had rented this specific room just to set the stage. The wallpaper was peeling, a flickering neon sign buzzed loudly outside the cracked window, and the smell of damp carpet filled the air. I wore my old, faded cardigan, my shoulders hunched, staring at a small digital recording device resting on the cheap nightstand. I knew they were coming. Desmond had tipped me off that Julian and Maya were frantically searching for my location. I made sure my private security team quietly leaked this exact address to them. Desperate dogs always bite at whatever meat is left on the bone, and I needed them to sink their teeth in while the tape was rolling. The loud, violent banging on the thin wooden door echoed down the cheap motel corridor. "Open this door right now, old man." It was Maya. Her voice was shrill, vibrating with pure, unadulterated entitlement. I slowly got up from the mattress, forcing my body to adopt the posture of a terrified, confused elder. I unlocked the rusty deadbolt and pulled the door open just a crack. Maya violently pushed it the rest of the way, making me stumble backward into the room. Julian walked in right behind her, his face pale, his eyes wide and bloodshot from the panic consuming him. Maya immediately covered her nose with her manicured hand. "God, this place smells like garbage," she sneered, looking around the dingy room with absolute disgust. "It is exactly where you belong." Julian did not waste time with insults. He was too terrified of the federal auditors waiting for him back at his office. He slammed a thick stack of legal documents onto the flimsy motel table. "Listen to me very carefully, Dad," Julian said, his voice shaking with desperate rage. "My firm is under a hostile audit. My assets are temporarily frozen because of a bureaucratic error. I need cash right now to hire a legal team, and you are going to give it to me." I looked at the papers on the table, keeping my hands visibly trembling. "What are these, Julian?" I asked softly, sounding utterly defeated. "You already took my house. I have nothing left to give you." Maya stepped forward, her eyes blazing with greedy malice. "Do not play dumb with us," she screamed, stepping so close I could smell her expensive perfume mingling with the damp scent of the motel room. "We know you have a massive federal pension and a solid retirement savings account. You are going to sign this medical proxy right now." I looked down at the document. It was a declaration of mental incompetence. They wanted me to voluntarily sign away my civil rights, granting them full, uncontested conservatorship over my mind, my body, and my remaining finances. They wanted the legal authority to drain my last dime. "I am not crazy," I whispered, forcing a slight pathetic tremor into my voice. "Why are you doing this to me?" I needed them to say it. I needed their malice recorded in crystal clear audio. "Because you owe us!" Maya shrieked, her face twisting into an ugly mask of pure hatred. "You are useless to society. You are just taking up space. If you do not sign this paper right now, Julian and I will drag you into a public courtroom. We will bring in doctors who will testify that you are completely senile. We will strip you of your human rights, lock you in a state-run asylum, and take the money anyway. Make it easy on yourself and just sign the paper." Julian pointed a trembling finger at my chest, his desperation making him reckless. "You have no power here, old man. No one cares about a homeless senior citizen complaining about his kids. Sign the proxy, or I swear to God we will destroy whatever pathetic life you have left." I looked at my son. I looked at my daughter. The two children I had raised, clothed, and fed. They were standing in a filthy motel room, eagerly threatening to destroy my mind and lock me in an asylum just to squeeze a few more dollars out of my perceived corpse. "I will not sign it," I said softly, dropping the tremble from my voice just for a fraction of a second. "You will have to take me to court." Maya grabbed her designer purse, her jaw clenching with fury. "Fine. You want to do this the hard way? You are going to regret this, you stubborn old fool. By next week, you will not even have the right to choose what you eat for breakfast." She stormed out of the room, her high heels clicking aggressively against the cheap linoleum floor. Julian gave me one last look of absolute venomous disgust before following her out. He slammed the door so hard the plaster flaked off the walls. I stood alone in the quiet, dingy room. I straightened my posture. The frail, terrified old man vanished instantly, replaced by the cold, calculating billionaire who controlled their entire existence. I walked over to the cracked nightstand and picked up the small digital recorder. I pressed stop. The audio file was perfectly clear. I now had my own children on tape explicitly outlining a conspiracy to commit elder abuse, medical fraud, and extortion. I smiled and sent the audio file directly to Desmond's encrypted server. The legal trap was now completely inescapable. But while I was securing my victory in the shadows, Maya's perfect, glamorous world was violently crashing down in the sunlight. Maya was married to a prominent state senator. He was a man whose entire career relied on an immaculate public image and absolute financial transparency. What Maya did not know was that earlier that morning, I had instructed Desmond to anonymously courier a very specific package to her husband's political office. The package contained a mountain of irrefutable evidence. It contained the receipts from the underground antique dealer proving Maya had fenced stolen family heirlooms. It contained the hidden credit card statements showing hundreds of thousands of dollars in secret suffocating debt. It exposed every single financial lie she had woven to maintain her fake high society status behind her husband's back. As Maya drove away from the slums of the South Side feeling victorious and arrogant after threatening me, her cell phone began to ring. It was her husband. She answered the phone expecting to chat about their upcoming charity gala. Instead, she was met with a wall of pure, unadulterated fury. Her husband did not yell. He spoke with the cold, calculated precision of a man who was cutting a tumor out of his life. He told her he had seen the financial records. He knew about the stolen art. He knew about the catastrophic debt that was about to ruin his upcoming election campaign. "Do not come back to my house," her husband said, his voice echoing coldly through her car's speakers. "I have already filed for an expedited divorce. My lawyers will be contacting you. Your belongings are sitting in suitcases at the end of the driveway. If you set foot on my property, I will have you arrested for trespassing." The line went dead. Maya pulled her luxury car over to the side of the road, her hands shaking violently against the leather steering wheel. The reality of her situation hit her like a freight train. She was completely broke. She was about to be a divorced social outcast. Her credit cards were maxed out. She had absolutely nowhere to go. Nowhere except the one place she thought she still owned. She turned the car around and drove through the pouring rain back toward the suburban mansion, the very same mansion she had kicked me out of just 24 hours ago. She dragged her heavy Louis Vuitton suitcases up the wet marble steps, completely unaware that inside that house her sister-in-law Chloe was waiting. Two desperate, greedy women were about to be locked in the exact same cage, and the bloodbath between them was just beginning. When a ship is sinking, the rats do not band together to scoop the water out. They turn on each other, tearing at each other's throats for the last piece of floating driftwood. That is exactly what happened when my daughter Maya dragged her rain-soaked luggage through the grand mahogany doors of the suburban mansion, the very same mansion she had proudly kicked me out of just one day prior. She was completely drenched, shivering, and entirely stripped of her high society arrogance. Her politician husband had frozen her bank accounts and thrown her out onto the street with nothing but the clothes on her back and a few suitcases. I watched the entire pathetic scene unfold in real time. Years ago, I had installed a state-of-the-art hidden security system throughout the estate to protect my late wife Beatrice's antique collections. Julian and Chloe never bothered to change the security codes because they assumed I was too old and technologically illiterate to understand how cameras worked. Now sitting in the absolute luxury of my downtown penthouse, I watched the high-definition monitors as Maya stood dripping wet in the grand foyer. Chloe walked out of the master suite and leaned over the sweeping mahogany staircase. She was wearing a designer silk robe, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water, looking down at my daughter with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Look what the rain washed in," Chloe sneered, her voice echoing through the massive house. "What are you doing here?" "Maya, you are tracking mud all over my imported rugs." Maya glared up at her sister-in-law, her hands trembling with cold and rage. "Do not talk to me like that, Chloe. This is my family home. My husband locked me out and I need a place to stay until my lawyers figure out my divorce settlement. Tell Julian to come down here and help me with these bags." Chloe let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut through the quiet house. "Julian is not here. He is trapped at his office dealing with a massive federal audit, and even if he were here, he would not help you. This is not your family home anymore, Maya." Julian and I sold it to Apex Capital. We have a few days before we have to vacate, and I'm not spending them hosting a broke, soon-to-be divorced liability. Maya dropped the handle of her heavy suitcase. Her face turned bright red. "Do not call me a liability, you gold-digging parasite. I grew up in this house. You only married my brother because you thought he was rich. You are nothing but a fake. If you do not let me stay here, I will tell the new owners you are trying to squat on their property." The two women stood in the grand foyer, violently screaming at each other, their voices dripping with decades of hidden resentment and jealousy. Chloe despised Maya because Maya was born into the wealth Chloe desperately wanted. Maya despised Chloe because Chloe had successfully manipulated Julian into giving her everything. They were two greedy, hollow creatures fighting over a kingdom that neither of them actually owned. I sat in the dark of my penthouse taking a slow sip of my coffee. It was time to drop a match into this powder keg. I pulled out my encrypted phone and opened a secure, untraceable messaging application. Chloe thought she was brilliant. She thought she had successfully stolen my identity to purchase $150,000 worth of diamonds on the Magnificent Mile. She was already planning her escape. She knew Julian was going to prison. She knew his corporate funds were frozen. She had absolutely no intention of standing by her husband when the federal agents arrived. She was preparing to pack a bag, take the untraceable diamonds, and flee the country, leaving Julian to rot. I selected the high-resolution scans of the credit card receipts from the Diamond Boutique. The receipts clearly showed my name, Nathaniel Sterling, as the account holder, but they featured Chloe's unmistakable signature at the bottom. I attached a brief anonymous note that read, "Check what your sister-in-law is hiding in her travel bag." I hit send. The message was delivered directly to Maya's cell phone. On my monitor, I saw Maya pull her phone from her wet coat pocket. The sharp ping of the notification interrupted her screaming match with Chloe. Maya looked down at the glowing screen. I watched her eyes widen in absolute shock as she scrolled through the digital receipts. She looked at the date. She looked at the massive total, $150,000 in loose diamonds. Then the realization hit her like a physical blow. Maya slowly looked up from her phone. The anger on her face vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating, predatory smirk. "You are packing a go bag," Maya said, her voice dropping into a deadly whisper. Chloe froze on the staircase, her grip tightening around her crystal glass. "I have no idea what you are talking about. You are delusional, Maya. Get your bags and get out of my house." Maya did not move. She slowly walked toward the base of the stairs, holding her phone up so Chloe could see the glowing screen. "Julian is getting audited by the feds right now. His firm is collapsing. His money is frozen. And you opportunistic coward, are planning to abandon him. That is a lie." Chloe snapped her face, turning pale as she recognized the receipts on Maya's screen. "Do not lie to me," Maya shouted, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You stole my father's identity yesterday. You opened credit cards in his name and bought $150,000 in loose diamonds. You are liquidating assets into untraceable gems because you are planning to run away to Europe the second Julian gets handcuffed." Chloe's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She was completely cornered. She knew that if Maya exposed her right now, her escape plan would be ruined. She would be dragged down into the federal indictment right alongside her husband. But Maya was not acting out of loyalty to her brother. Maya did not care about Julian going to prison. Maya only cared about her own survival. "You are entirely broke," Maya said, a vicious, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "And so am I. My husband took everything. But you have a fortune in diamonds sitting upstairs in your travel bag. What do you want?" "Maya," Chloe hissed, her voice trembling with absolute hatred. "I want 50%, Maya demanded, crossing her arms. "You are going to go upstairs, open that bag, and give me half of those diamonds right now. If you try to refuse or if you try to run, I will call the Federal Bureau of Investigation immediately. I will hand them the receipts. I will tell them exactly who forged my father's signature, and I will watch them drag you out of this mansion in chains. Give me half and I will keep my mouth shut. We can both disappear." The silence that followed was suffocating. I watched the monitor, fascinated by the depths of their depravity. Maya was actively extorting her sister-in-law for a share of the money stolen from her own father. There was absolutely no honor among thieves. Chloe stared down at Maya, her mind working furiously. She knew Maya was dead serious. She knew she had no leverage. Slowly, the panic on Chloe's face melted away. She replaced it with a sickeningly sweet, terrifyingly fake smile. "You win," Chloe said, letting out a heavy, defeated sigh. "You are right. Julian is going down and we both need to survive. We are family after all. We should stick together. Come into the kitchen. Let us have a glass of wine to calm our nerves, and then we will go upstairs and divide the stones." Maya relaxed, believing she had just won the negotiation. She dragged her wet bags into the hallway and followed Chloe toward the grand kitchen. I switched the camera feed to the kitchen monitors. Chloe walked over to the massive marble island and poured 2 glasses of extremely expensive red wine. She handed one to Maya, who eagerly took a large gulp, desperate to warm up from the freezing rain outside. Chloe turned her back to Maya, pretending to search for a bottle opener in one of the drawers. I zoomed the camera in. I saw exactly what Chloe was doing. She pulled a small orange prescription bottle from the pocket of her silk robe. It was a heavy industrial-grade sleeping sedative. With practiced, terrifying speed, Chloe crushed 3 of the pills into a fine powder against the marble counter and seamlessly swept the powder into her own glass. Then she turned around with a bright smile. "Oh, Maya, your glass is almost empty. Let me top you off." Before Maya could protest, Chloe switched the glasses, handing the heavily drugged wine to her sister-in-law. Maya, completely oblivious and consumed by visions of her diamond payday, drank the rest of the wine in 2 large swallows. "We have a deal then," Maya said, wiping her mouth. 50-50. 50-50. Chloe repeated, her eyes cold and dead. It did not take long. Less than 5 minutes later, Maya began to sway on her feet. Her words started to slur, and her eyes rolled back into her head. She tried to grab onto the edge of the marble island for support, but her legs gave out completely. She collapsed onto the expensive hardwood floor with a heavy, lifeless thud. Chloe stood over Maya's unconscious body, looking down at her with absolute sociopathic indifference. She did not check Maya's pulse. She did not care if she had accidentally given her a lethal overdose. She simply stepped over my daughter's body and walked toward the stairs. I leaned forward in my chair, staring at the screen. I knew exactly where Chloe was going. She was not just going to pack her diamonds and run. Her greed was an endless, bottomless pit. She was heading straight for the master suite. She was heading for the hidden wall safe behind the grand mirror. The safe that contained the rest of my late wife Beatrice's vintage heirloom jewelry. The pieces that were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. She wanted it all. "Run, Chloe," I whispered to the glowing monitors in my penthouse. "Take every last piece. Fill your bags to the brim. Run straight into the concrete wall I have built for you." She had absolutely no idea that the federal authorities were already waiting for her at the international terminal of O'Hare Airport. And she had no idea that her desperate escape plan was going to be the final nail in her own coffin. I watched the security feed on my monitors with cold fascination as Chloe stepped carefully over my daughter's unconscious body. She did not even glance down to check if Maya was breathing. Her eyes were completely fixed on the master bedroom at the top of the stairs. I switched the camera feed and watched her rush into the room I had once shared with my late wife Beatrice. Chloe walked straight to the heavy, ornate mirror bolted to the far wall. She swung it open, revealing the hidden steel safe. She knew the code. Julian must have given it to her during one of their greedy late-night conversations. She punched in the numbers and pulled the heavy door open. She did not just take the loose diamonds she had purchased with my stolen identity. Her hands moved frantically as she cleared out every velvet box on the shelves. She took Beatrice's vintage pearl necklaces. She took the antique sapphire earrings. She took the solid gold bracelets I had bought for our 30th wedding anniversary. She swept hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of my family history into her oversized designer travel bag. She zipped it shut, smoothed down her silk dress, and checked her reflection in the mirror. She looked victorious. She looked like a woman who believed she had just outsmarted everyone in Chicago. She pulled out her phone and ordered an exclusive black car service to take her to O'Hare International Airport. She was not going to wait around for Julian to finish dealing with the federal auditors. She knew his firm was collapsing. She knew the $3 million he embezzled was frozen. She had no intention of standing by her husband and going down with his sinking ship. She was going to catch a first-class overnight flight to Paris, liquidate the stolen gems on the European black market, and disappear into a life of luxury. I sat back in my leather chair in my downtown penthouse and watched her black car speed down the rainy suburban driveway. I picked up my encrypted phone and sent a single text message to Special Agent Marcus Vance. "The bird has left the cage. She is heading to Terminal 5. Vance replied immediately. "We are in position." An hour later, the black car pulled up to the international departures curb at O'Hare. The airport was a chaotic swarm of travelers, luggage carts, and flashing departure screens. Chloe stepped out of the vehicle like she owned the entire concourse. She wore oversized designer sunglasses to hide her face, a thick cashmere coat draped elegantly over her shoulders, and she clutched the heavy travel bag tightly against her side. She walked past the long, miserable lines of economy travelers with an expression of supreme arrogance. She headed straight for the priority first-class security and customs checkpoint. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she was leaving the miserable wreckage of her marriage and my ruined life far behind her. She walked up to the podium and handed her glossy blue passport to the uniformed customs agent. The agent scanned the document through the digital reader. A harsh, bright red border instantly flashed across his monitor. The agent did not react. He had been thoroughly briefed. He simply looked up at Chloe and politely asked her to step to the side of the line, explaining that there was a minor system glitch that needed to be verified by a supervisor. Chloe let out a loud, dramatic sigh of pure annoyance. She crossed her arms and tapped her designer heel against the polished airport floor. She loudly complained to the agent that she was flying first class to Paris and that they were wasting her valuable time. She demanded that they hurry up before she missed her complimentary champagne boarding service. She was so consumed by her own inflated sense of self-importance that she did not notice the heavy glass doors of the security office sliding open behind her. She did not notice the three tall men in dark suits stepping out into the terminal. Special Agent Marcus Vance walked right up behind her, flanked by two armed federal officers. Chloe Sterling Vance said, his deep, authoritative voice cutting through the noise of the busy airport. Chloe spun around in irritation, pulling down her sunglasses to glare at the man interrupting her. "Yes," she snapped aggressively. "Who are you?" Vance reached into his suit jacket and pulled out his federal badge, holding it up directly in front of her face. "I am Special Agent Vance with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are under arrest for aggravated identity theft, grand larceny, and federal wire fraud." The color drained entirely from Chloe's face. Her mouth dropped open, but no sound came out. The absolute shock paralyzed her vocal cords. "You cannot be serious," she finally gasped, her voice trembling and high-pitched. "This is a mistake. I am flying to Paris. My husband is a wealthy investment executive. Do you have any idea who we are?" Vance did not smile. He signaled to the officers. "We know exactly who you are, Mrs. Sterling. We also know that the passport you just handed to that agent was flagged and placed on a federal no-fly list 3 days ago." 3 days ago, Chloe whispered, her eyes widening in pure horror as the realization finally crashed into her brain. "Yes," Vance continued smoothly. "The exact same day you illegally used the social security number of Nathaniel Sterling to open 3 fraudulent lines of credit. We have been monitoring every single swipe of those cards. We have the time-stamped digital receipts from the Diamond Boutique on the Magnificent Mile. We have the security footage. You left a digital trail so wide a blind man could have followed it." Chloe stumbled backward, bumping into the podium. Panic completely overtook her. She clutched her heavy travel bag to her chest like a shield. "You do not understand," she pleaded, her arrogant facade completely dissolving into pathetic desperation. "I did not steal anything. The old man is senile. He told me I could use his cards. He is losing his mind. I am just holding his assets for safekeeping." Vance shook his head slowly. "The man whose identity you stole is sitting in a downtown penthouse right now, and his mind is sharper than yours will ever be." One of the federal officers stepped forward and firmly grabbed Chloe's arm, pulling it behind her back. Chloe shrieked, struggling against his grip, screaming that they were making a mistake, screaming that she demanded to call her lawyers. But the officer was merciless. He grabbed her other arm and pulled it back. The heavy, cold steel handcuffs clicked loudly around her wrists, locking her in place. The heavy travel bag slipped from her shoulder and hit the floor. The zipper broke open on impact. Dozens of velvet boxes spilled out onto the terminal floor. The lid of a black velvet case popped open, exposing the glittering array of loose, untraceable diamonds she had purchased yesterday. Sitting right next to them were the vintage pearl necklaces and solid gold bracelets belonging to my late wife. The surrounding passengers stopped what they were doing. Dozens of people pulled out their cell phones, recording the wealthy, arrogant woman weeping hysterically as federal agents gathered up a fortune in stolen jewels from the airport floor. It was a complete, devastating public execution of her character. She was no longer a high society elite. She was just a common, desperate thief caught red-handed in an airport terminal. Vance read her the Miranda rights as they marched her through the crowded concourse. She sobbed the entire way, her head hung low in absolute shame and terror. An hour later, Chloe was sitting in a freezing concrete holding cell at the Federal Detention Center in downtown Chicago. Her designer silk dress was wrinkled and stained with her own tears. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed loudly above her head. She was sitting on a cold steel bench, shivering uncontrollably. The glamorous life she thought she had secured just hours ago was completely obliterated. She was facing decades in a federal penitentiary, and she knew she had absolutely no way out. A guard walked up to the heavy steel bars of her cell and slid a standard-issue telephone through the small metal slot. "You get one phone call. The guard grunted, turning and walking away down the sterile hallway. Chloe lunged for the phone. Her hands shook so violently she could barely punch in the numbers. She dialed the only person she thought could possibly save her. She dialed Julian. She needed him to hire the best criminal defense lawyers in the city. She needed him to leverage whatever corporate funds he had left to post her bail. She needed him to save her from the nightmare she had created. She held the plastic receiver to her ear, listening to it ring. It rang once. It rang twice. It rang a third time. "Please, pick up Julian." She sobbed into the receiver, pacing frantically in the tiny cell. "Please, pick up the phone." But the line just kept ringing. Julian was not going to pick up the phone. He was not ignoring her out of spite. He was ignoring her because he was currently paralyzed by a terror far greater than anything Chloe was experiencing in that jail cell. While Chloe was getting handcuffed at the airport, the federal auditors in Julian's corporate office had temporarily stepped out to contact their field directors. Julian had been sitting alone at his desk, desperately trying to figure out how to unfreeze his $3 million. But then the heavy glass doors of his private office had swung open. It was not the auditors returning. It was the very client Julian had stolen the $3 million from in the first place. The client was a massive, intimidating man wearing a tailored suit that barely contained his muscular frame. He was flanked by two towering bodyguards whose faces promised absolute violence. They locked the office door behind them and pulled the window blinds down. Julian sat frozen in his chair, staring at the men who had just invaded his sanctuary. He knew exactly who they were, and he knew exactly what they were capable of. And what Julian was about to discover was that this terrifying client did not just represent a random investment fund. This client worked directly for the chairman of Apex Capital. He worked directly for me. I sat in the plush leather chair of my true domain, the chairman's suite on the 60th floor of the Apex Capital Tower. Through the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the glass skyscraper directly across the street. That was where my son Julian rented his corporate office. I poured myself a small glass of aged bourbon, clipped the end of a premium Cuban cigar, and lit it slowly. I watched the thick smoke curl toward the ceiling, feeling the absolute stillness of absolute power. On my massive mahogany desk, a secure monitor displayed the live security feed from inside Julian's private office. Julian was completely falling apart. His expensive phone was vibrating relentlessly on his desk, sliding across the polished wood. I knew exactly who was calling him. It was Chloe calling from the federal detention center at the airport, desperately begging for a lifeline after being caught with stolen diamonds. But Julian did not even look at the caller ID. He could not care less about his wife right now. He was too busy burying his face in his trembling hands, suffocating under the crushing weight of the federal audit happening just down his hallway. He was a cornered animal frantically trying to figure out how to escape a concrete room with no doors. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors to Julian's private office swung wide open. Julian jumped out of his chair, letting out a sharp gasp, entirely expecting the federal auditors to walk in with handcuffs and federal marshals. But the men who stepped into his office were far more dangerous than any government agents. It was Victor. Victor was one of my most ruthless and trusted associates, a man who managed the aggressive high-yield private portfolios for my secondary investment firm. He was a towering, impeccably dressed African-American man whose polite, soft-spoken demeanor masked a terrifying business acumen. Julian knew Victor as his biggest and most intimidating private client, the man Julian had foolishly decided to embezzle $3 million from. Victor did not come alone. He was flanked by two massive security contractors, silent giants wearing dark suits who immediately locked the office door behind them and smoothly pulled down the window blinds, plunging the room into a claustrophobic shadow. Julian backed up slowly until his waist hit the edge of his mahogany desk. Julian choked out, his voice cracking with pure terror. "What are you doing here today? The building is swarming with federal auditors. You absolutely cannot be here right now." Victor casually unbuttoned his suit jacket and took a seat on the leather sofa opposite Julian's desk. The two bodyguards remained standing by the locked door, their arms crossed, their expressions completely dead and unreadable. "I do not care about federal auditors, Julian," Victor said, his voice calm, smooth, and chilling to the bone. "I only care about the $3 million missing from my portfolio. The $3 million you personally guaranteed was sitting safely in a high-yield pension account." Julian completely broke. The fake corporate hotshot shattered into a million pathetic pieces right there in his office. His knees buckled and he dropped to the expensive hardwood floor. He was a 42-year-old man, sobbing like a terrified child. "Victor, please listen to me," Julian begged, holding his shaking hands up in frantic desperation. "I have the money. I swear on my life I have the money. I just sold a massive family estate yesterday for $5 million in cash. The funds were wired to me this morning. I can show you the receipts. I can pay you back everything right now." Victor tilted his head, looking down at Julian as if he were a disgusting insect that had crawled onto his shoe. "If you have the money," Julian Victor said slowly, "why is it not in my account? Why did I get a targeted alert this morning that my portfolio is bleeding dry? It is Apex Capital." Julian cried out, tears of absolute panic streaming down his pale cheeks. "They froze the transfer. There was a stupid bureaucratic error, a compliance flag in the contract I signed yesterday. They locked my funds just as I was moving them over to you. But I can fix it, Victor. I will sue them. I will give you the full $5 million once it unfreezes. I will give you the mansion back. Just please call off your men. Do not hurt me. Give me one more day." Victor let out a low, chilling laugh. It was not a laugh of amusement. It was a laugh of absolute, devastating pity. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, staring directly into Julian's terrified, tear-streaked face. "You really do not understand the game you are playing, do you?" Victor whispered, his voice slicing through the dark room. "You think this is about a simple bureaucratic error. You think you just had a random run of bad luck with a corporate contract." Victor reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek encrypted tablet. "I do not care about the federal auditors," Julian Victor said, his eyes locking onto my son. "I do not care about Apex Capital, and I do not care about your pathetic whining excuses. I am here because my chairman wants a word with you. And when my chairman demands a meeting, you do exactly what you are told." Victor tapped the screen of the tablet, initiating a secure, high-definition video call. He stood up from the sofa and walked over to Julian, who was still kneeling on the floor, shivering uncontrollably. Victor shoved the tablet directly into Julian's trembling hands. "Hold it and look at the screen," Victor commanded harshly. I sat in my 60th floor office across the street, watching the camera feed connect on my desk monitor. I took a slow drag from my cigar and exhaled a thick cloud of smoke. The screen flickered, and I was suddenly looking directly at my son's face. He was utterly pathetic. His designer tie was skewed, his eyes were bloodshot and wide with panic, and tears were tracking heavily through the cold sweat on his cheeks. Julian stared down at the screen of the tablet. I watched the exact moment his brain tried to process the impossible image appearing in front of him. He was fully expecting to see a ruthless, faceless corporate mob boss demanding his money. Instead, he saw me. He saw the old, discarded man he had thrown out into the freezing rain just a few days ago. He saw the father he had humiliated, mocked, and tried to strip of his basic human rights so he could steal a pension. But I was not wearing a ragged cardigan. I was wearing a bespoke Armani suit. I was sitting behind a desk made of imported mahogany in an office that screamed of unimaginable wealth and absolute terrifying power. "Hello, Julian," I said, my voice echoing loudly through the tablet speakers in his locked, dark office. My tone was casual, relaxed, and completely devoid of any paternal affection. "I hear you are having some serious trouble with your bank accounts today." Julian stopped breathing. His jaw went completely slack, hanging open in a silent scream. His eyes widened so far I thought they might burst from his skull. He stared at the tablet, then looked out his office window toward the towering skyscraper directly across the street, then back at the tablet. The geographic realization hit him. The financial realization hit him. The utter devastating scope of the invisible trap I had built around him finally crashed down on his head with the weight of a collapsing building. "Dad," Julian whispered. The word barely made it past his trembling lips. It sounded like a dying gasp. You are the chairman." "I am the chairman of Apex Capital," I said, leaning forward into the camera, letting my cold, unforgiving gaze pierce right through his pathetic soul. "I am the man who bought the mansion you stole from me. I am the man who drafted the poison contract you so eagerly signed yesterday. And I am the man who just froze your stolen $3 million this morning." Julian was completely paralyzed. His hand shook so violently that the image on my screen vibrated like an earthquake. You thought you were the smartest person in the room, Julian. I continued, taking another slow puff of my cigar, letting the smoke obscure my face for a second. You thought you could throw me out like common trash. You thought you could declare me legally insane and drain my retirement. You thought you were stealing from a helpless, confused old fool. But you were not. I paused, letting the silence suffocate him before delivering the final blow. You were stealing from me, Julian. You stole $3 million from Victor, which means you stole $3 million directly from my secondary investment firm. You tried to wash my own money with the funds from my own house to save yourself from a federal prison. Julian could not process it. The human brain is simply not built to withstand that level of absolute immediate destruction. His mind fractured completely under the weight of the revelation. No, Julian choked out, shaking his head frantically, his tears falling onto the tablet screen. No, this is not real. You are a mechanic. You are just a retired mechanic from the South Side. This is a nightmare. I was a mechanic 40 years ago, I replied, my voice dropping to a deadly, icy whisper. Then I became a king in the shadows, and you, my ungrateful, pathetic son, just became my absolute prisoner. The tablet slipped from Julian's slick, sweating fingers. It hit the hardwood floor of his office with a loud crack, the screen shattering into a dozen pieces before going completely dark. The shattered pieces of the tablet lay scattered across the hardwood floor of Julian's office, reflecting the pale, terrified face of a man who had just realized he was entirely destroyed. I did not need to watch the rest of the live feed to know exactly what happened next. Victor and his men silently unlocked the door and walked out, leaving Julian to face the federal wolves alone. Less than 5 minutes later, the auditors and federal agents swarmed his office. They did not just fire him. They made a public spectacle of his absolute ruin. Julian was escorted out of his own corporate building by armed federal marshals. He walked through the main lobby while his entire staff watched in stunned silence. By the time he reached the sidewalk, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority had already issued an emergency mandate stripping him of his financial licenses. He was no longer a hotshot executive. He was a disgraced, unlicensed criminal facing a mountain of federal indictments. While Julian was being paraded out of his building, my daughter Maya was waking up to her own personal hell. She slowly peeled her face off the cold marble floor of the mansion kitchen, her head throbbing violently from the heavy sedatives Chloe had slipped into her wine. She crawled toward her designer handbag and pulled out her phone. The screen was flooded with notifications, but none of them were from the underground art dealer. They were from her husband's legal team. The expedited divorce papers had been officially filed. But the destruction did not stop there. Her husband was a powerful politician who moved with ruthless efficiency when his public image was threatened. Using the evidence I had anonymously provided, he had secured an emergency court order granting him full sole custody of their children. The judge cited Maya's secret catastrophic debt and her involvement in fencing stolen art as proof of extreme moral bankruptcy. She was permanently locked out of her own home, stripped of her children, and cut off from every single bank account. She was left with nothing but the wet clothes on her back and the luggage sitting in the hallway of my mansion. But the most pathetic reunion of the day belonged to Chloe. Julian had spent the entire afternoon sitting in the bleak waiting room of the Federal Detention Center. His corporate funds were completely frozen, but he had one last desperate lifeline. He drained a hidden emergency savings account, an account he had kept secret from everyone just to post his wife's exorbitant bail. When Chloe finally walked out of the holding cell, she looked like a ghost. Her expensive silk dress was filthy and wrinkled. Her perfect hair was a tangled mess. But the most striking accessory she wore was not a stolen diamond necklace. It was a bulky black electronic ankle monitor strapped tightly around her leg. The federal judge considered her a severe flight risk after catching her at the airport with a bag full of stolen gems. She was confined to the state of Illinois, monitored by federal satellites every single second of the day. The three of them dragged their broken, defeated bodies back to the suburban mansion as the sun began to set. The grand estate, which they had proudly claimed as their own just 48 hours ago, now felt like a massive, echoing tomb. I watched them from the security cameras in my penthouse. They gathered in the main living room, sitting on the expensive leather sofas, staring at the floor. The silence between them was toxic, thick with mutual hatred and shared humiliation. Maya was the first to speak. She pointed a trembling finger at Chloe. "You drugged me." Maya screamed, her voice cracking with fury. "You spiked my wine and left me unconscious on the floor so you could steal my mother's jewelry and run away. You were going to leave us all to burn." Chloe did not even have the energy to fight back. She just stared blankly at the electronic monitor blinking on her ankle. "It does not matter anymore," Chloe whispered hoarsely. "They took everything. The feds confiscated the diamonds, the pearls, all of it. I have nothing. We have nothing." Julian sat with his head in his hands, completely paralyzed by the reality of his situation. He took a deep, shuddering breath and looked at his sister and his wife. It was him, Julian said, his voice completely hollow. "What are you talking about?" Chloe asked, frowning. "Who was it?" "It was my father," Julian replied, his eyes wide and completely devoid of hope. "He is not a poor mechanic. He is the chairman of Apex Capital. He is the billionaire who bought this house. He is the one who froze my accounts. He has been playing us this entire time." Maya and Chloe froze. The color completely drained from their faces as Julian's words slowly registered in their greedy minds. The frail, ignorant old man they had thrown out into the rain was actually the invisible hand crushing their throats. But greed is a very strange disease. It creates a powerful, blinding delusion that prevents people from accepting their own defeat. As I watched them on the monitor, I saw the panic in their eyes slowly begin to shift. The human brain, when pushed to the absolute brink of destruction, will construct the most ridiculous fantasies just to survive. Julian suddenly sat up straight. He blinked rapidly, his mind racing as he tried to grasp onto a single pathetic thread of logic. "Wait," Julian said, his voice rising with a sudden desperate manic energy. "Wait a minute. Apex Capital bought this house for $5 million. That contract is legally binding. I signed the transfer deed." "What does that matter?" Maya snapped. "He froze your accounts. The money is gone." "No," Julian insisted, standing up and pacing across the Persian rug. "Think about it. He froze my accounts because I owed his secondary firm $3 million. He is holding the funds as collateral for the embezzlement, but the house sold for $5 million. $3 million covers the debt. That leaves $2 million in clean legal equity." Chloe looked up, a sick spark of hope returning to her eyes. "Are you saying we still have money?" "Yes," Julian declared, entirely convincing himself of his own fabricated legal theory. "He cannot legally seize the remaining $2 million. He has to release it. Once the federal audit clears and the $3 million is officially forfeited to his firm, Apex Capital will be forced by law to unfreeze the remaining balance. We still have $2 million. We are still millionaires." I sat in my penthouse and actually laughed out loud. Their arrogance was truly a marvel of nature. They had committed multiple federal felonies, they were facing decades in prison, and they were still sitting in my house dividing up money that would never belong to them. They actually believed they could outsmart the legal trap I had spent months perfecting. Maya wiped her tears, her posture stiffening as the delusion took hold of her as well. "You are right," Maya said, her voice regaining that familiar, haughty tone. "We just need to weather the storm, but we have a major problem right now. My country club friends are already texting me about the divorce. People are talking." Chloe nodded aggressively, pointing at her ankle monitor. "The society blogs are already whispering about my arrest at the airport. They think we are broke. They think we are criminals. If the elite circles in this city think we have lost our wealth, we will be blacklisted forever. We will never be able to rebuild our lives, even with the $2 million. Julian stopped pacing. He looked around the massive, luxurious living room. He looked at the crystal chandeliers and the grand staircase. He made a decision fueled by absolute blinding pride. "Then, we do not let them think we are broke," Julian said, his eyes gleaming with reckless desperation. "We still have possession of this mansion until the end of the week. We still have the caterers and the event planners on standby from my corporate budget. We are going to throw a party." "A party?" Chloe asked, looking confused. "A farewell gala." Julian corrected her, smoothing the lapels of his wrinkled suit. "We invite everyone, the politicians, the corporate partners, the socialites. We tell them we are voluntarily liquidating our local assets because we are relocating our empire overseas. We show them that we are completely untouched by these federal rumors. We drink expensive champagne and we walk out of this house looking like absolute royalty." Maya smiled a vicious, superficial smile. "It is perfect. It controls the narrative. We show them that the Sterling family cannot be broken." I reached for my phone and dialed Desmond's number. I did not take my eyes off the security monitors as my lawyer answered the call. Desmond? I said, my voice low and smooth. Yes, Nate. Are they packing their bags? Desmond asked. No, I replied, smiling into the darkness of my office. They are doing something much better. They are throwing a farewell gala right here in the mansion. They want to show high society that they are untouchable. They want a grand exit. I heard Desmond chuckle softly. They are setting up a stage for their own execution. Exactly, I said. Get my best tuxedo pressed and ready. Call the chief of police and make sure he is personally available this Saturday night. My ungrateful children want to put on a show for the city. I think it is only fair that I make a guest appearance. Saturday night arrived with the kind of crisp autumn chill that made the wealthy wrap themselves in expensive furs. The driveway of my estate, the home I built with 40 years of blood and sweat, was packed with luxury vehicles. Valets were running back and forth. A string quartet was playing classical music in the grand foyer. Waiters in crisp white shirts carried silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of imported champagne. Julian, Maya, and Chloe had pulled out all the stops. They spent the last of Julian's hidden emergency cash to throw this ridiculous farewell gala. They invited city councilmen, corporate partners, socialites, and anyone with a thick wallet and a loose tongue. They needed to control the narrative. They needed high society to believe they were liquidating their local assets to move to Europe, not because they were bankrupt criminals facing federal prison. Chloe wore a stunning floor-length emerald gown. It was a beautiful piece of fabric, specifically chosen because the heavy hemline completely concealed the bulky federal tracking monitor strapped tightly around her ankle. She smiled and laughed, playing the perfect hostess, pretending she had not been arrested in an airport terminal just days prior. Maya wore a black designer dress, mingling with the wives of politicians, telling them her husband was simply on a business retreat and that their marriage was stronger than ever. I sat in the back of my armored limousine, parked discreetly at the end of the long driveway, watching the live feed from the hidden security cameras on a tablet. I watched Julian step up to the center of the grand staircase. He held a crystal champagne flute in his hand and tapped it gently with a silver spoon. The clear, sharp ringing sound echoed through the massive living room. The string quartet stopped playing. The 200 wealthy guests turned their attention to my son. Julian cleared his throat, his face adopting a mask of profound, manufactured sorrow. Thank you all for coming tonight, Julian began, his voice echoing perfectly in the quiet room. As many of you know, my wife, my sister, and I are preparing for a massive transition. We are moving our corporate operations overseas, expanding our family empire globally. But before we leave this beautiful estate, we felt it was necessary to gather our closest friends and colleagues for one final toast. Julian paused, looking down at his expensive shoes, performing a masterclass in fake grief. It is a bittersweet evening for us, he continued, forcing his voice to crack with emotion. Bittersweet because we must also share some tragic family news. Just 2 days ago, my father, Nathaniel Sterling, passed away peacefully in his sleep at his residential care facility. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of elites. Women covered their mouths in shock. Men bowed their heads in respectful silence. Maya stepped up beside Julian and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, wiping a completely dry, non-existent tear from her eye. Chloe stood on his other side, looking down with a perfectly rehearsed expression of mourning. My father was a simple, humble man, Julian said, lifting his champagne glass toward the crystal chandelier. He struggled with his mind in his final days, but we take comfort in knowing he is finally at rest. He would have wanted us to celebrate his life to move forward with strength and grace. So tonight, we raise our glasses to him and to the bright, prosperous future of the Sterling family. The guests raised their glasses in unison. To Nathaniel, they murmured respectfully. In the back of the limousine, I handed the tablet to Desmond. My lawyer shook his head in absolute disgust. They are truly sick, Desmond said quietly. They just buried you alive in front of half the city just to squeeze out a few drops of sympathy. I did not feel angry. I felt an icy, terrifying calm. I opened the door of the limousine and stepped out into the cool night air. I was no longer the tired old man in the faded cardigan. Tonight, I was dressed as the undisputed king of my empire. I wore a custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo, a crisp white shirt with diamond cufflinks, and polished leather shoes that caught the dim light of the driveway. I carried a solid ebony walking stick with a silver handle, not because I needed it to walk, but because it looked like a scepter of absolute authority. Desmond stepped out beside me, equally sharp in a dark charcoal suit. A moment later, a sleek black, unmarked police cruiser pulled up right behind our limousine. The doors opened, and Chief of Police Harrison stepped out. He was in his full formal dress uniform, his gold badge gleaming on his chest. Chief Harrison was a good man, a man whose community programs I had anonymously funded for over a decade. When Desmond told him what my children were attempting to do, he insisted on being there personally. "Are you ready, Mr. Sterling?" the chief asked, adjusting his utility belt. "I have been ready for 20 years, I replied. The three of us walked up the long, sweeping driveway. The valet boys saw us coming and immediately stepped back, their eyes wide with intimidation. Two private security guards hired by Julian stood at the top of the marble steps. They moved to block the massive mahogany double doors, holding up their hands. "Excuse me, gentlemen, this is a private event," the lead guard said firmly. "We need to see your invitations." Chief Harrison did not say a word. He simply stepped forward, pulled his heavy coat back, and revealed his gold badge and service weapon. "Step aside, son," the chief said, his voice rumbling like thunder. The security guards went completely pale. They took one look at the chief of police, then looked at my cold, unblinking eyes, and immediately scrambled out of the way. Inside the mansion, the guests were just taking their first sips of champagne. Julian was accepting handshakes and condolences from a wealthy technology executive. Maya was nodding sadly as a politician's wife patted her arm. Chloe was smiling, basking in the warm glow of high society approval. I reached out and placed both of my hands on the heavy brass handles of the double doors. I pushed them open with a violent explosive force. The thick mahogany doors slammed against the interior walls with a deafening crash that shook the very foundation of the house. The 200 guests jumped in terror. The low hum of conversation vanished instantly. The clinking of glasses stopped. Every single head in the grand foyer turned toward the entrance. I stood perfectly still in the doorway, framed by the cold night behind me. I looked at the crowd of terrified elites, then my eyes locked directly onto my son. Julian dropped his champagne glass. It shattered against the marble floor, splashing expensive wine all over his polished shoes. He turned the color of a fresh corpse, his jaw unhinged, hanging open in a silent, suffocating scream. He looked as if he had just seen a ghost crawl out of a grave. Maya let out a piercing, high-pitched shriek. She stumbled backward, bumping into a waiter and sending a tray of appetizers crashing to the ground. I stepped into the light of the crystal chandelier, the heavy taps of my polished shoes and my silver cane echoing loudly in the dead silence of the room. Desmond walked on my right. Chief Harrison walked on my left. I parted the sea of high society elites just by walking forward. The guests scrambled out of my way, their eyes wide with confusion and fear, looking at the man they had just toasted to, in death, currently walking toward them in a bespoke tuxedo. "Good evening, Julian," I said, my voice rich, deep, and absolutely commanding. "I heard you were throwing a party to celebrate my tragic passing. I apologize for arriving late to my own funeral." The guests began whispering frantically among themselves. "Is that his father? I thought he died. Why is the chief of police here?" Chloe completely lost her mind. The perfectly crafted illusion she had spent all of her stolen money to create was evaporating right before her eyes. The terror of the federal charges, the humiliation of the ankle monitor, and the sheer impossibility of my presence broke her entirely. She pushed her way to the front of the staircase, her face twisted in a mask of hysterical, desperate rage. "Security!" Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Guards, get in here right now. Throw this crazy old man out of my house. He is a fraud. He is a criminal. Call the police. He is trespassing on our private property." Chief Harrison stepped in front of me, his posture rigid and commanding. He looked up at Chloe, who was hyperventilating on the second step of the grand staircase. He slowly reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out his gold police badge, holding it up high for every single person in that room to see. "Nobody is getting thrown out," Chief Harrison announced, his voice carrying the absolute authority of the law, cutting through Chloe's hysterical screaming. "And you are not calling the police because the police are already here." Chloe froze, her mouth open, her chest heaving as she stared at the gold badge. Chief Harrison lowered his hand and looked directly into Chloe's terrified eyes. "Furthermore, Mrs. Sterling, you are going to lower your voice and step back. You do not own this property. You do not own the ground you are standing on." The chief turned slightly, gesturing toward me with absolute, undeniable respect. You are currently speaking to Nathaniel Sterling, and he is the sole legal owner of this entire estate. The two children I cherished kicked me out of the very mansion I built with my own blood and sweat. Leave and never return to this mansion of ours, they told me, throwing my clothes onto the wet pavement in a black plastic trash bag. The ones I called my family betrayed me without a single ounce of hesitation. I did not argue. I did not scream. I did not beg for their mercy. I just picked up that trash bag, smiled to myself, and walked away in the freezing rain. 5 minutes later, I made one phone call, and soon they would be on their knees begging for a forgiveness they would never get. The silence in the grand foyer was absolute. 200 of the most powerful people in Chicago stood frozen like statues, their crystal champagne flutes hovering midair. Chief Harrison's words echoed off the marble walls, shattering the last remaining fragments of Julian's fabricated reality. You are currently speaking to Nathaniel Sterling, the chief had said, and he is the sole legal owner of this entire estate. Julian looked like a man who had just been shoved out of an airplane without a parachute. He stumbled backward on the grand staircase, gripping the mahogany railing so hard his knuckles turned completely white. Chloe was trembling violently, her eyes darting around the room, desperately searching for an escape that did not exist. The high society guests, the politicians, the corporate partners, the people they had invited to witness their glorious victory were now the front row audience to their public execution. I stepped further into the light of the crystal chandelier, the silver handle of my cane resting firmly in my grip. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True power commands the room without ever shouting. You threw a magnificent party, Julian, I said smoothly, my voice carrying to every corner of the massive room. You invited the elite. You bought expensive champagne. You stood on that staircase and asked these good people to raise a glass to my tragic senile passing. You wanted a grand farewell, so I decided it was only right that I provide the entertainment. I turned slightly and nodded to Desmond. My brilliant lawyer did not waste a single second. He walked over to the central audio console that was controlling the ambient classical music for the gala. He pulled a sleek black digital device from his suit pocket and plugged it directly into the mansion's main sound system. Julian, I said, staring directly into my son's terrified, tear-filled eyes. You spent the last month lying to every single person in this room. Let us show them the truth. Desmond pressed play. The string quartet music instantly cut out. For a split second, there was a sharp burst of static, and then Chloe's shrill, vicious voice blasted through the hidden surround sound speakers hidden all over the mansion. You are done here. This mansion is ours now. Leave and never return. Go back to the South Chicago slums where you belong. That is your real place anyway, you old parasite. The guests gasped collectively. Women covered their mouths in absolute horror. Several men shifted uncomfortably, glaring up at Chloe. Chloe squeezed her eyes shut, covering her face with her hands as her own venomous words rained down on her. But the recording did not stop. Desmond switched to the next file. This time it was Julian's voice. Desperate, calculating, and undeniably criminal. It was the recording from the filthy motel room on the south side. My firm is under a hostile audit. I need cash right now to hire a legal team, and you are going to give it to me. Then Maya's voice echoed through the ballroom, dripping with pure entitlement. We will drag you into a public courtroom. We will bring in doctors who will testify that you are completely senile. We will strip you of your human rights, lock you in a state-run asylum, and take the money anyway. Make it easy on yourself and just sign the paper. The crowd erupted into furious, disgusted whispers. The politicians and socialites were staring at the three of them like they were rabid animals. But Desmond was not finished. He played the final, most devastating recording. The audio captured from the hidden device in Julian's corporate office. I have the money. I swear on my life I have the money. I just sold a massive family estate yesterday for $5 million in cash. I can pay you back everything right now. Apex Capital froze the transfer. Desmond hit the pause button. The silence that returned to the room was heavy, suffocating, and dripping with absolute judgment. I looked around the grand foyer, making eye contact with the wealthy corporate executives Julian had invited. My son is currently under a massive federal investigation, I announced clearly. He embezzled $3 million from the pension funds of hardworking, innocent people. He attempted to illegally sell my home to cover up his federal crimes. And when that failed, he and his wife conspired to forge medical documents to have me locked in a psychiatric ward so they could drain my remaining retirement accounts. The fallout was instantaneous. In the world of high finance, nothing is more toxic than a man caught stealing pension funds. Loyalty does not exist when federal indictments are involved. A prominent investment banker, a man Julian had been desperately courting for a bailout loan all evening, slammed his champagne flute down onto a silver tray. He looked up at Julian with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You are a thief." The banker spat out his voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. "You invited us here to drink your wine while you were actively stealing from your own clients and trying to institutionalize your own father. You sicken me." The banker turned his back and marched toward the front door. It was the signal the rest of the room needed. Like rats fleeing a sinking ship, the guests began to stream toward the exit. The politicians practically ran, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive scandal that was about to hit the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers. "No, wait!" Julian screamed, stumbling down the first few steps of the staircase, reaching his hands out toward the fleeing executives. "Please do not leave. You do not understand. It was a mistake. I can fix this. I am still a managing director. We can do business." Nobody even looked back. The valets outside were overwhelmed as 200 guests demanded their cars immediately. Within minutes, the grand, bustling farewell gala was completely empty. The only people left in the massive mansion were the private security guards, Chief Harrison Desmond, myself, and the 3 broken, pathetic traitors standing on the staircase. Julian collapsed onto the marble steps. He pulled his knees to his chest and began to sob loudly, the final agonizing realization setting in that he had absolutely no one left. His reputation was ashes. His career was obliterated. Maya watched the entire room empty out. She looked at her brother crying uncontrollably on the stairs. She looked at Chloe, who was hyperventilating against the mahogany railing, her designer dress shaking violently. Maya realized the ship had completely slipped beneath the waves. She was going to drown with them, unless she found a way to jump onto a lifeboat. Maya suddenly broke away from Julian and Chloe. She ran down the grand staircase, her high heels clicking frantically against the marble. She threw herself onto the floor right at my feet, landing hard on her knees. Her designer dress pooled around her as she looked up at me, tears streaming down her carefully makeup-covered face. "Dad," Maya cried, clasping her hands together in a gesture of pure, pathetic desperation. "Dad, please. You have to believe me. I did not want to do any of this. It was Julian and Chloe. They forced me. They told me that if I did not go along with their plan, they would cut me out of the family entirely. They manipulated me, Dad. I was scared. I just wanted to protect you. Please, I am your daughter. I love you." She reached out, trying to grab the edge of my tuxedo trousers. I stepped back, letting her hands grasp empty air. I looked down at her. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I did not see a daughter begging for forgiveness. I saw a hollow, greedy shell of a human being trying to save her own skin. "You love me," I repeated softly, the coldness in my voice freezing the air around us. "You want to protect me." "Yes," Maya sobbed dramatically, nodding her head. "You know me, Dad. I would never betray you on my own. It was all them. I am the victim here, too. My husband threw me out. I have nothing. Please let me stay here with you. I will take care of you." I reached into the inner pocket of my tuxedo jacket. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I did not hand it to her. I simply opened the flap and turned it upside down. Dozens of glossy, high-resolution photographs cascaded out of the envelope. They fluttered down like dead leaves, landing all around Maya's knees on the polished marble floor. Maya looked down. Her fake, dramatic sobs stopped instantly. Her entire body went completely rigid. The photographs showed Maya standing in the dimly lit back room of the underground antique shop. They showed her aggressively arguing with the black market dealer. They showed her eagerly taking the thick stacks of cash. And most devastatingly, they showed the items she had sold. Beatrice's antique 18th century paintings. "You stood in a cheap motel room and threatened to lock me in an asylum," I said, my voice as heavy and hard as an iron vault. "And 12 hours before that, you packed up the paintings your mother cherished, the paintings she loved more than anything in this world, and you sold them to a criminal fence to pay for your luxury handbags." Maya stared at the photographs, her mouth opening and closing in utter shock. The absolute, undeniable proof of her betrayal was literally surrounding her. "Dad, I can explain." She choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "I was desperate. I was going to buy them back." I leaned down slightly, leaning my weight on my silver cane, bringing my face closer to hers. "Do not call me Dad," I said, the venom in my words stripping away any last illusion of family. "You are no daughter of mine. You sold your mother's soul for $20,000. You sold your own blood for pennies. You are nothing to me." Maya slumped forward, her face burying into her hands, her wails echoing against the marble floor. She was completely broken, exposed as the treacherous, greedy parasite she truly was. I stood back up, straightening my jacket. The first layers of their masks had been ripped away, but the final absolute punishment was still waiting to be delivered. Maya lay weeping on the marble floor, her treacherous heart finally crushed under the weight of her own actions. The grand foyer of the mansion was dead silent save for her pathetic sobs. But delusion is a powerful drug. It infects the mind, making a drowning man believe he can still walk on water. Julian, who had been sitting paralyzed on the steps of the grand staircase, slowly pushed himself to his feet. His tailored suit was wrinkled. His face was pale and slick with cold sweat, but his eyes burned with a sudden desperate defiance. He was a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of superiority, and he simply refused to accept that a mechanic from the south side of Chicago had beaten him. He grabbed the mahogany banister and marched down the remaining steps, stepping right over his weeping sister. He stopped a few feet away from me, breathing heavily, trying to puff out his chest to project a dominance he no longer possessed. He looked at me, then at Desmond, and finally let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed unnaturally through the empty, cavernous room. "So what?" Julian spat out, his voice dripping with venomous arrogance. "So what if you humiliate us in front of the entire city? So what if you show a few pictures and play some hidden recordings? Do you really think you have won, old man? You think you can just come into my house and destroy my life without consequences?" I looked at him, my expression completely unchanged, leaning comfortably on my silver cane. "I am not destroying your life, Julian. I am simply letting you reap the exact harvest you planted with your own 2 hands. Julian shook his head, his frantic laughter growing louder, echoing off the high ceilings like the cries of a madman. "You are a fool. You have always been a fool. You think you are so smart because you secretly run Apex Capital, but you made a massive, fatal mistake. You bought this house. You signed the wire transfer. The contract is fully executed and legally binding under state law. You can embarrass me. You can expose my debts. You can tell the whole world that I am a terrible son. I do not care. Do you hear me? I do not care. Because at the end of the day, the $5 million is sitting securely in my account." Chloe, who had been shivering in the corner, suddenly stopped crying. Her eyes widened as she caught on to Julian's desperate logic. She stood up, smoothing down her ruined emerald gown, a sudden sick glimmer of hope returning to her tear-stained face. "He is right," Chloe sneered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You cannot take that money back. The bank froze it because of your little compliance alert, but once the investigation clears that $5 million is legally ours, we will take that money, we will hire the best lawyers in the country, and we will crush you in court. We will leave this city and live like kings overseas, and you will be left rotting in this empty, oversized tomb." They were so confident. They clung to that $5 million like a life raft in the middle of a hurricane, completely unaware that the raft was made of solid lead, and they were already sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Their greed was so absolute that it blinded them to the reality of the man standing in front of them. I did not argue with them. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of anger. I simply turned my head slightly and looked at my oldest friend and brilliant attorney. "Desmond," I said softly, the absolute silence in the room amplifying every single syllable. "Please educate my son on the finer points of corporate contract law. Specifically the stipulations he blindly agreed to yesterday morning when he thought he was outsmarting me." Desmond stepped forward, the heels of his polished shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. He did not look angry. He looked entirely professional, like an elite surgeon about to make the final fatal incision. He unbuttoned his tailored suit jacket and pulled a folded legal document from his inner pocket. It was a perfect certified copy of the exact contract Julian had eagerly signed at the luxury law firm. Julian Desmond began, his deep voice resonating with absolute legal authority. "When you sat in that conference room yesterday, desperate to secure the funds to cover your massive embezzlement, you signed 45 pages of dense legal text. You did not read them. You did not ask your counsel to review them. You simply saw the zeros on the wire transfer and signed your name. That was the biggest mistake of your miserable life." Julian swallowed hard, the fake confidence suddenly wavering in his bloodshot eyes. "It is a standard real estate transfer," he stammered, taking a small step backward. "A basic liquidation agreement. I know how to read a contract. You cannot trick me. Then you should have read page 42, Desmond replied coldly. He unfolded the heavy parchment document and held it up into the light of the crystal chandelier. Section 7, paragraph 4, the punitive forfeiture clause. Let me read it to you out loud so there is absolutely no confusion regarding your future. Desmond adjusted his glasses and began to read the legal text. His voice perfectly measured every word, striking Julian like a physical blow to the chest. In the event that the seller is found to be engaged in active financial fraud, federal embezzlement, or is the subject of an active federal criminal investigation at the time of signing, the buyer, Apex Capital, retains the unilateral and uncontested right to immediately freeze and permanently seize all transferred funds. Julian's jaw dropped. The color vanished from his face entirely, leaving him looking like a polished marble statue. "No," he whispered, shaking his head side to side. "No, that is illegal. You cannot just seize $5 million. That is theft." Desmond did not stop. He raised his voice, reading the final devastating sentence of the death clause. "Furthermore, any and all funds seized under this punitive clause shall be considered liquidated damages for reputational risk to the buyer, and the physical property shall remain the sole uncontested asset of Apex Capital without any further financial compensation owed to the seller." Desmond lowered the paper and looked Julian directly in the eyes. "In simple terms, Julian, you committed federal pension fraud. The Federal Bureau of Investigation confirmed your crimes this morning when they raided your office and stripped your licenses. Because you signed this specific contract while actively committing a federal felony, you triggered the poison pill. Apex Capital is not just freezing your $5 million. We have legally confiscated it. Every single penny belongs to us now." The words hung in the air, heavy, toxic, and absolute. The reality of the situation finally breached the thick, stubborn walls of Julian's delusion. "You do not get the money, Julian," I said, stepping closer to him, my voice completely devoid of mercy or paternal warmth. "You do not get the house. You do not get a second chance. You illegally sold me my own mansion, and because you are a convicted thief, you just gave it to me for absolutely free. I did not spend a single cent to take my home back from you." Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream. Her legs gave out completely. She fell to her knees, tearing at her expensive, perfectly styled hair, sobbing hysterically as the reality of her complete, inescapable poverty finally crushed her. She was wearing a federal ankle monitor, facing decades in a maximum security prison, and now she did not even have a single dollar to hire a basic public defender. She was utterly destroyed. Julian could not speak. He could not scream. He could not even cry. He just backed away from me, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it looked as though his mind had completely snapped. He bumped into the heavy mahogany front doors, his hands desperately clawing at the polished wood, as if he were trying to dig his way out of a nightmare. But the nightmare was not over. The universe has a beautiful, poetic way of delivering justice exactly when it is needed the most. Suddenly, the grand glass windows flanking the front doors lit up with flashing bright amber lights. The heavy mechanical grinding sound of a large diesel engine echoed loudly from the circular driveway outside. Julian slowly turned around and looked through the glass panes. His eyes widened even further, reflecting the flashing yellow lights in the darkness. I walked up behind him, leaning heavily on my silver cane, and looked out the window. Parked right in the center of the sweeping driveway was a massive, heavy-duty commercial tow truck. Two men in high-visibility jackets were aggressively securing thick steel chains to the front axles of Julian's prized possession. His custom-imported luxury sports car, the car he had proudly bought to parade his fake wealth in front of the city's elite. The car he had driven to the country club while I was taking the city bus to the grocery store to save money. "What are they doing?" Julian choked out his voice, barely a raspy whisper, his hands pressed flat against the cold glass. "That is my car. They cannot take my car. I paid for that." I smiled, watching the tow truck operator engage the hydraulic winch. The luxury vehicle slowly lifted off the pristine driveway, dangling helplessly in the cold night air. "That is not your car, Julian," I corrected him softly, stepping right up to his ear. "That car belongs to the bank. When your corporate accounts were seized this morning for federal embezzlement, your personal assets were instantly flagged for immediate liquidation. You missed your last 3 payments because you were too busy spending your stolen money on lavish farewell parties and underground document forgers. The tow truck engine roared to life. The heavy steel chains clanked loudly as the truck pulled away, dragging the gleaming sports car down the driveway and out into the dark, rainy streets of Chicago. Julian stood frozen against the glass, watching his final piece of dignity disappear into the night. He had absolutely nothing left in the entire world. No money, no career, no house, no car, no family. He was completely, utterly stripped bare. He was a hollow shell of a man standing in a mansion he no longer owned, waiting for the federal authorities to lock him in a cage. And the most beautiful part of it all was that he had built that cage all by himself. The heavy diesel engine of the tow truck faded into the distance, taking Julian's prized sports car and the very last shred of his fabricated dignity with it. The flashing amber lights disappeared down the wet suburban street, leaving the grand circular driveway completely dark and empty. Inside the mansion, the silence was absolute. It was no longer the silence of a high society gala waiting for a toast. It was the silence of a graveyard. Just 30 minutes ago, this grand foyer was packed with 200 of the most powerful people in Chicago, drinking expensive champagne, laughing at fake jokes, and celebrating the supposed death of a retired mechanic. Now the crystal flutes lay shattered on the marble floor. The string quartet had fled out the back door. The hired catering staff had abandoned their stations, leaving trays of expensive caviar untouched on the mahogany tables. The massive estate had transformed into a cold, echoing tomb, and the 3 people standing in the center of it were nothing more than ghosts. I turned away from the glass windows and walked slowly back to the center of the foyer. The rhythmic tapping of my silver cane against the marble was the only sound in the massive room. I looked at the 3 of them. Julian was still pressed against the front door, his eyes wide and vacant, staring out into the empty driveway. Maya was still slumped on the floor, surrounded by the glossy photographs of her own unforgivable betrayal. Chloe was leaning heavily against the staircase railing, shivering in her emerald gown, her breathing shallow and ragged as the heavy reality of her federal ankle monitor dragged her down into the abyss. They had lost their money. They had lost their reputations. They had lost their freedom. But they were still standing in my house, and it was time to take that away from them, too. I nodded slightly to Chief Harrison. The chief of police stepped forward, his polished black boots stepping over the spilled champagne and broken glass. He stopped right in front of Julian, his towering frame casting a long, dark shadow over my trembling son. Julian Sterling. Chief Harrison began, his deep voice carrying the absolute, uncompromising weight of the law. You and your wife executed a fraudulent real estate transaction using stolen corporate funds. You engaged in federal embezzlement, and you conspired to commit medical fraud against the legal owner of this property. Because the transfer deed was signed during the commission of a federal felony, the sale is completely voided under state and federal law. Julian did not look up. He just kept staring blankly ahead, his mind completely shattered. This property belongs entirely to Apex Capital, the chief continued relentlessly. And as the chairman of Apex Capital, your father has filed an immediate emergency eviction order based on criminal trespass and active fraud. You no longer have any tenant rights, any squatter rights, or any legal claim to remain on this premises. Chloe gasped, pushing herself off the staircase railing. Wait! She choked out, her voice cracking in pure panic. What are you saying? You cannot just kick us out tonight. It is freezing outside. We have nowhere to go. Our accounts are frozen. You have to give us a 30-day notice. That is the law. Chief Harrison turned his sharp, unforgiving gaze toward Chloe. That is the law for legal tenants, Mrs. Sterling. You are not a tenant. You are a federal criminal trespassing on stolen property. The local magistrate signed the emergency order 10 minutes ago. The chief looked at his watch, then looked back at the 3 broken people trembling before him. You have exactly 10 minutes. Chief Harrison announced, his voice echoing off the high ceilings like a ticking time bomb. 10 minutes to gather whatever personal clothing you can fit into 2 standard suitcases. You are not to touch any jewelry, any electronics, any artwork, or any valuables purchased with illicit funds. If you are not out of those front doors in 600 seconds, I will have my officers physically drag you out in handcuffs and charge you with criminal trespassing. Your time starts right now. The ultimatum hit them like a physical blow. 10 minutes. 10 minutes to pack up their entire fraudulent lives. Chloe completely lost whatever remained of her sanity. She let out a piercing, hysterical scream and scrambled up the grand staircase. She was tripping over the long hem of her expensive designer gown, her heels sliding dangerously against the polished wood. I watched her run toward the master suite, sobbing and hyperventilating. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. She thought she could still salvage some of her expensive designer clothes, her imported shoes, the superficial armor she used to project her false superiority. But I had already anticipated her greed. Desmond picked up a radio from his belt and spoke calmly into it. Security team shadow the female suspect in the master suite. Ensure she only takes basic clothing. Confiscate any designer bags or luxury items. Those are the property of the federal government now. Upstairs, I could hear the immediate sounds of chaos. I could hear Chloe screaming at my private security guards as they blocked her from grabbing her $10,000 handbags. I could hear the sound of hangers being ripped from the closets, followed by Chloe's devastated, uncontrollable weeping as she realized she was leaving with nothing but basic fabric. Down in the foyer, Maya had not moved a single muscle. She was still sitting on the marble floor, staring blankly at the photographs of the stolen paintings. She did not run upstairs to pack. She did not scream or cry or beg for more time. She was entirely paralyzed by her own ruin. Her politician husband had already thrown all of her belongings into the rain hours ago. Her suitcases were already packed, sitting in a miserable wet pile by the front entrance. She had absolutely nothing left to gather. She just sat there, a hollow, empty shell of a woman waiting for the clock to run out. I watched them break. I watched the arrogant, cruel children who had thrown my clothes into a black plastic trash bag, now experiencing the exact same humiliation, amplified 1,000 times over. They had looked at my gray hair and my faded cardigan and assumed I was a weak, powerless old man. They had assumed my silence was compliance. They had completely forgotten that the deepest roots can shatter the strongest concrete. 5 minutes passed. The mansion was filled with the sound of doors slamming upstairs, heavy footsteps, and Chloe's continuous pathetic sobbing. 7 minutes passed. 2 of my private security guards escorted Chloe down the grand staircase. She was no longer walking like a high society elite. She was practically being dragged. In her hands, she clutched a cheap canvas duffel bag. Her beautiful emerald gown was torn at the hem. Her perfect makeup was completely washed away by her tears, leaving dark, messy streaks down her pale face. The federal ankle monitor blinked bright red beneath the fabric of her dress, a constant glowing reminder of the cage she had built for herself. She stumbled to the bottom of the stairs and collapsed against the wall, dropping her canvas bag onto the floor. She could not even look at me. She just buried her face in her hands and wept. 9 minutes passed. Chief Harrison stepped forward, resting his hand on his utility belt. "Time is up," the chief announced, his voice slicing through the heavy, toxic air of the foyer. "Everyone out. Right now." Maya slowly pushed herself off the marble floor. She moved like a zombie, her eyes completely dead. She did not look at me. She did not look at her brother or her sister-in-law. She simply walked over to her wet suitcases by the door, grabbed the handles with trembling hands, and dragged them out into the cold, unforgiving night. She disappeared into the darkness, walking away into a world that no longer cared about her existence. Chloe picked up her canvas bag. She let out one final agonizing sob, casting a look of pure hatred and absolute despair toward Julian. "You ruined my life," she whispered to him, her voice cracking. "You promised me we were safe. You promised me we were rich. You are nothing." She turned around and limped out the front door, stepping out into the freezing rain, dragging her heavy monitored leg behind her. And then there was only Julian. My son was still standing by the heavy mahogany doors. He had not gone upstairs to pack. He had not gathered a single item of clothing. He had just watched his entire world evaporate in front of his eyes. He watched his corporate partners flee in disgust. He watched his car get towed into the night. He watched his sister walk out into the rain with nothing. He watched his wife curse his name and abandon him. He had absolutely nothing left. The illusion was completely shattered. The money was gone. The power was gone. The fake arrogant executive was dead. Julian slowly turned away from the open front door. The cold wind blew into the grand foyer, rustling his expensive wrinkled suit. He looked at the empty room. He looked at Chief Harrison. He looked at Desmond. And finally he looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot, surrounded by dark, heavy bags. His face was a mask of pure, absolute devastation. His breathing was shallow and erratic, like a man who had forgotten how to pull air into his lungs. He let go of the door handle. His legs trembled so violently I thought he was going to collapse right there on the marble. But he did not fall. Instead, he took a slow, agonizing step forward, then another. He staggered toward me, moving like a wounded, dying animal. He was crossing the vast, empty space of the grand foyer, leaving wet footprints on the polished stone. He stopped just 2 feet away from where I stood, leaning on my silver cane, watching him with cold, unblinking eyes. The 10 minutes were over. The execution was complete. But Julian was about to make one final, desperate move. Julian staggered toward me, his movements erratic and heavy, like a man wading through deep, freezing water. His eyes were completely hollowed out. The arrogant, untouchable corporate executive had been entirely erased, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, broken boy. He reached out a trembling hand, but he did not dare to touch the fabric of my tailored tuxedo. He let his arm drop uselessly to his side. He slowly turned his head and looked back out the massive, open front doors. Out in the pouring, relentless Chicago rain, Maya and Chloe had not gone far. Where could they possibly go? Their bank accounts were completely frozen, their credit cards were canceled, their high society friends had abandoned them the very second the word federal was spoken. The long, sweeping driveway was blocked by flashing red and blue lights. Federal transport vans and local police cruisers were idling by the iron gates, waiting patiently to collect the trash. The sheer gravity of their absolute ruin finally broke whatever fragile, delusional pride they had left. Maya dropped her heavy suitcases into the mud. She slowly turned around and dragged her soaked, shivering body back up the marble steps of the mansion. Chloe followed right behind her, limping pitifully, her ruined emerald dress dragging through the dirty puddles, her expensive makeup washing away in the cold rain to reveal the true ugly face of her greed. Julian watched them return to the threshold. He looked at his sister and his wife, completely stripped of all their designer arrogance, reduced to pathetic, shivering beggars. And then my son's legs finally gave out. Julian collapsed onto the cold marble floor of the grand foyer. He fell straight to his knees, his head bowing low. Maya crawled through the open doorway, weeping uncontrollably, and dropped to her knees right beside him. Chloe, completely broken by the reality of her federal tracking monitor and her inescapable poverty, slumped down next to them. The three of them, the treacherous architects of my supposed demise, were now kneeling side by side at my feet, bowing their heads in ultimate, absolute defeat. Dad Julian choked out his voice, cracking into a pathetic, agonizing sob. "Dad, please. I am begging you. Please have mercy on us. We have nowhere else to go. We have absolutely nothing left. I am going to federal prison. They are going to lock me in a cage for 20 years. Please, I am your son. You raised me. You cannot just throw us out into the street like this." Maya grabbed the wet hem of Julian's suit jacket, sobbing so hard her entire body convulsed. "We are sorry, Dad. We are so sorry. We were stupid. We were blinded by the money and the lifestyle. Please do not do this to us. Let us stay here. We will sleep in the basement. We will work for you. We will do anything you want. Just please do not let them take us away." Chloe did not even have the strength to speak. She just kept her head bowed against the cold marble, weeping violently into her hands, completely crushed by the undeniable reality of her own monumental greed. I looked down at the three of them. My face was a mask of absolute, unforgiving ice. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I did not feel a single shred of sorrow for the tears they were shedding. I felt nothing but the clean, sharp edge of pure justice. "You stood on this very porch and told me to leave and never return to this mansion of yours," I said, my voice echoing softly but firmly across the cavernous foyer. "You handed me a trash bag and told me I belonged in the slums. You did not hesitate to throw away 45 years of my love for a few stolen dollars. You did not hesitate to drug your own sister. You did not hesitate to sell your dead mother's sacred memories to a black market fence. And you did not hesitate to try and lock me in a psychiatric asylum so you could drain my life savings." I paused, letting the crushing weight of their own sins suffocate their pathetic pleas. "You are not crying because you are sorry," I continued, my tone dropping to a deadly, icy whisper. You are crying because you got caught. You are crying because the old man you thought was weak and ignorant turned out to be the architect of your complete destruction. I raised my right hand slightly. From the shadows of the long hallway, two of my private security guards stepped forward in perfect synchronization. They were holding something crumpled in their hands. With a swift, deliberate motion, the guards tossed the items onto the marble floor right in front of the kneeling, weeping trio. 3 thin, black plastic garbage bags fluttered to the ground, the exact same kind of cheap, disposable trash bags Chloe had used to throw my old clothes into the dirt just a few days ago. "I am a fair and reasonable man," I said, leaning comfortably on my silver cane, staring down at my ruined son. "So I will extend to you the exact same courtesy you extended to me. You are allowed to take whatever you can fit into these bags. The federal holding facility is waiting for you outside." Julian let out a gut-wrenching wail of pure, unadulterated agony, grabbing his hair with his hands as his mind finally shattered. Maya screamed, burying her face into the floor, begging God for one more chance. But I had already turned my back. I walked away from them, the steady, rhythmic tap of my silver cane echoing down the grand hallway. Behind me, I heard Chief Harrison and the security guards stepping forward, their heavy boots scuffing against the marble as they physically hauled my weeping, screaming children out into the raging storm. I did not turn around. I did not look back when I heard the heavy mahogany double doors slam shut with a thunderous final boom. The heavy brass locks clicked firmly into place. They were gone forever. I walked slowly through the quiet, sprawling halls of my home. The chaotic noise of the freezing rain, the flashing police sirens, and the pathetic, desperate cries of the traders were entirely shut out. The mansion was warm, silent, and finally cleansed of their toxic, suffocating greed. I walked into my private, oak-paneled study and gently closed the heavy door behind me. I walked over to the antique crystal decanter resting on my desk and poured myself a generous measure of 20-year-old Kentucky bourbon. I took a slow, deep sip, feeling the rich, smoky warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the last lingering ghosts of the past few days. I turned around and looked up at the massive gilded oil painting hanging above the grand fireplace. It was the beautiful portrait of my late wife, Beatrice. Her kind, wise eyes seemed to look down at me through the dim light of the study, her lips curved into a soft, knowing smile. She had always known I would protect our legacy. She had always known I would never let anyone disrespect what we had built together. I raised my crystal glass to her in the quiet, absolute sanctuary of the room. The long, ugly war was finally over. The empire we built from nothing was completely secure. And for the first time in years, I felt a profound, unbreakable sense of peace. Greed is a venom that blinds the mind and rots the soul. My children looked at my gray hair and saw a target. They looked at my silence and assumed I was powerless. They forgot that the roots of a deeply planted tree can shatter the concrete above it. Family is not a free pass for abuse, and respect is not something you inherit, it is earned. I didn't destroy them, I simply handed them the exact consequences of their own choices. True wealth isn't the mansion you reside in, but the dignity you refuse to surrender. Did you enjoy this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to cut toxic, ungrateful family members out of your life to protect your peace and your dignity? Share your experiences with me. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice boundaries and powerful life lessons. Until next time, stay strong, stay true to yourself, and never let anyone dictate your worth.